hoping for a couple really good games. Only 3 football games left on the calendar before we move into the offseason. So excited for Sunday, a couple good NFL games. Schedule release day in the Big 12. We'll get into it on the Utah side of things, on the BYU side of things, and not to be too hyperbolic and crazy as a radio host in January. But as I look at it on paper, there's an excellent chance that BYU-Utah game is a virtual play-in for the Big 12 championship. So we'll get to all the angles today. Of course, a new dawn of Utah football has become upon us with Morgan Scalley as the head coach. BYU really didn't suffer a lot of losses in the transfer portal, and they were able to keep their coaching staff intact outside, of course, Jay Hill, who followed Kyle to Michigan. So we'll get to all that on the program today. The Utah Jazz had a really good win last night over the Minnesota Timberwolves. It was the second night of a back-to-back. Rudy Gobert, Joe Ingles, Mike Conley back in town. But some really good Ace Bailey moments, some really good Keontae moments, some good Isaiah Collier moments, and that's kind of what you watch for right now if you're a Jazz fan, just the moments for a team that is pretty front-facing about tanking so they can hold on to their asset, which is the right thing to do, as frustrating as it can be. So we'll get to some Jazz basketball on the program today. The Runnin' Utes nearly had the win last night on the road to K-State, but they fell short. Terrence Brown's three-point shot at the buzzer grazed the rim and fell short, and the Utes dropped one to Kansas State. We've got Utah BYU coming up on Saturday down in Provo. BYU will be very well rested. No games for them all week long. Of course, we saw these two teams just a few weeks back where BYU rolled up to Salt Lake and got a gutty road win against the Utes, 89-84. So some college basketball on the show, some NBA basketball on the show, some college football, some NFL football, and maybe some Real Salt Lake. I'm in a mood today because of this. We'll get to it. Maybe sign some players and stop sending out surveys. I don't know. The season starts in like 4 weeks. And who's going to kick the soccer ball into the back of the net? An issue. I'm glad we're focused on rebranding and renaming when we actually don't even have a roster. Yeah, I'm grumpy today about that. But we'll get to it on the show. I am told, little birdie, cute little birdie, currently in Portugal. He has flocked over to Portugal. We could have an announcement on this show coming up on Friday of some players that have been signed. But in the meantime, let's argue about whether or not we should rebrand a team that has won a championship and been here for 24 years. Anyway, Tony Jones is going to be our first guest today. Our old buddy Tony Jones from The Athletic, who used to cover the Utah Jazz. Tony was a media member here for a bunch of different years and actually covered Utah and BYU and college football and basketball, covered the Jazz for the Trib, then landed with The Athletic. Tony is now in Philadelphia, but he keeps track of the Jazz quite a bit. The Athletic, kind of like ESPN, they do not have a Jazz allocated writer because, well, you know. Quinn McLean's going to stop by to talk some college football. Good day to have Quinn on. We'll do some schedule release. We'll talk the college football national championship. Indiana is your champ, as you know. We'll bring Quinn in today. Tim McMahon, Band McMahon from ESPN, who, when the Jazz are trying hard, does cover the Jazz for the Worldwide Leader. But we'll do some NBA with Tim. And then Bowler, Craig Bowlerjack, will stop by as well on this Wednesday show. We've got Tony Jones. We have Quinn McLean. We have Tim McMahon. We have Craig Bowlerjack. You have me. Hello. How are you? My name is Spence Checketts. I host that show. And that guy, Porter Larson, core strength needed to ride a bull, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Grip strength?
All of it. All of the above. The ultimate athlete sport. Kind of like MMA. Sean's got I was impressed with Sean's rodeo knowledge.
So
at least
was I.
The bull riding
It
side.
caught me off guard.
Apparently he's really into like the PBR, which is a completely separate circuit from like pro rodeo. It's just bull riding, which is kind of on brand for OC. But yeah, man, both the animal athletes and the rodeo cowboys, you got to be elite on the athletic side.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So we are giving away some tickets to the professional bull riding event. You can listen to Sean's show. And I'll tell you what, I have one more year left where I can say I'm in my mid-40s. And, coming up in March, your boy's birthday, I have to admit that I'm in my late 40s after that. I can't imagine bull riding's in my future anymore. I feel like it's a young man's game, but it's just one of those things you see and you're like, I wonder how that would go for me. And I would imagine it would not go well.
Well, you don't have to make a career of it, but you can always get on one. Just one.
I don't know that so you have not done this before, right?
I've never been on like a bucking bull. I have been on broncos that either intentionally or unintentionally have bucked, including one that put me in hospital for quite some time as a youngster. But never intentionally got on a bull and tried to do it for 8 seconds.
Do you know who Cody Wright is?
Yeah.
So Cody Wright was inducted into the Utah Sports Hall of Fame the night my father was. And talk about like the best dude, most humble, down-to-earth guy. Like they were reading over all of his achievements. And you tell me, I feel like he's as good as anybody that we have in the state. And his speech, he just cried and thanked his family. I mean, like John Kimball, RSL president, he actually used a line that night. He said, I wouldn't walk across the street to shake very many people's hands. I'd walk across the street to shake that guy's hand.
Yeah, the whole Wright family is like synonymous with pro rodeo on both sides, whether it's bull riding, really any rough stock event they have tried their hand at and won world titles at. And all Utah guys down from Milford area, Bryson Barnes stomping grounds, and the Fields, the father-son duo, Casey Lewis Field, are some of the best of all time. There's a lot of really, really good rodeo cowboys from Utah.
Yeah, 6 brothers. Cody has 4 sons, and they're all like just badass cowboy bull riders.
World champs.
Very cool.
Including this past December.
Very, very cool. All right, Tony Jones, our first guest on this Wednesday afternoon. But before TJ stops by, courtesy of our good friends and your good friends at Prize Picks, it's time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN700 with Prize Picks.
All right. As I referenced, as I'm grabbing my reads, there are only 3 football games left on the calendar before we enter the offseason. The big game is almost here. Wink, wink. And there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close the season out right with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. You can find your community on Prize Picks with the new social feeds feature. You can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. You can even follow Prize Picks partners like us and tailor Fadar picks with just one click. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup, because on Prize Picks, it is good to be right. Porter, have you been able to review the football schedule released earlier today for the football team that plays their home games about a mile away from our studio?
A little bit. Nothing really out of the ordinary there outside of you lose a bye week. Utah usually kind of builds 2 of those in by playing a week 0 game. They're not doing that this year. So, the rivalry game is once again being played 3-4 weeks before the season's end. But ultimately, it's a schedule that I think is, I don't want to say favorable to Utah, but when you get 7 home games and your conference slate is tilted towards your home matchups, I there's not too much to be mad about if you're a Utah fan or up on the staff.
So coming up, we've got a wide open segment at about 3:30. We'll do a deep dive into this, but at first glance, the Utah BYU game is shaping up to be a potential play-in game for the Big 12 championship. And here's why I say that, okay? Utah avoids Texas Tech, and so does BYU. Utah also avoids Arizona State. Now, Arizona State is replacing their quarterback, Sam Levitt, but Kenny Dillingham, I think, has proven that year in and year out, Arizona State's going to have something to say about the conference championship. If they don't go to it, they're probably going to be a team that will be in your way, because Kenny is just kind of that coach that is has proof of concept. One bye week that I like. I like that it's one bye week. I don't like that it comes super early, but that's really not that big of a deal. So November is certainly going to be the toughest stretch, okay? Houston is a talented team, and they finished with a win over LSU in the Texas Bowl. But Utah gets BYU at home, okay? So that's obviously a massive game for a number of different reasons. BYU has beaten Utah 3 straight times after that run where Utah beat them, I think, 9 straight. But so many teams in this conference are replacing quarterbacks. Some teams in this conference are replacing coaches. And I don't know, man. Like, as I'm looking at this, it's impossible to do the whole, like, okay, win, loss, win. Like, that's an exercise in futility. But the non-con is very manageable. All of the games are at home. It's Idaho, it's Arkansas, it's Utah State. A road game at Iowa State, and typically I would say that's a little bit tricky, but they're replacing, like, if you think Utah football got by a coach leaving, Porter, was it 19 players that Matt Campbell took with him to Penn State?
That was the number last I checked, and that was a few days before the portal ended. So I don't think it got too much higher than that.
So that includes Rocco Beck, their quarterback, who's a solid player. That's a road game. You get Kansas at home. You should be able to manage that. I have no idea what to make of the Deion Sanders path at this point, where, if you remember not too long ago, it was all anybody wanted to talk about. And they beat a couple of, average teams to start his tenure. And, people like Stephen A. Smith, who, by the way, does not know a thing. Well, quite frankly, doesn't know a thing about anything. He just has mastered the art of filibustering. And if you listen, he says nothing, but he just keeps talking. Believing that, like, Colorado is going to win the national championship. That's a road game, but that should be manageable. Houston, you get at home. Houston's a good team. Cincinnati's replacing Brendan Sorsby. BYU, on paper, in my opinion, is the second best team in the Big 12. I think it's Tech, and then I think it's BYU, and then you get into the mix of where Utah could fall year one under Morgan Scalley, but you get them at home. And again, massive game for so many reasons. Arizona gets Noah Fafita back. So Arizona, BYU, Utah, there are like 4 teams in this conference that actually are not replacing a quarterback. Arizona is one of them. TCU is losing Josh Hoover, of course, to Indiana. West Virginia, by all accounts, has a pretty solid transfer portal class and recruiting class, but they have been down. This schedule, if I'm Morgan Scalley, I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking 10 wins, man. Like, now, the problem is what the College Football Playoff Committee essentially has told us, even though they won't say it out loud. And this is where we get into the whole P2 versus P4 conversation. Now, of course, Miami out of the ACC nearly won the national championship. Notre Dame, not a member of a conference, I think is a top 5 team on paper next year. You cannot avoid the fact that a lot of the power brokers in college football exist in the Big Ten and the SEC. And what they have basically told us, and if you pay attention, they've told us early on in the season that they view the Big 12 as a one-bid league. If you want to get into the 12-team CFP, now, if they expand it, we have a different conversation, and I do think eventually it will expand. But if it continues to remain a 12-team CFP, if you're in the Big 12, the message they tell you is, if you want to come to our party, you have to go win your conference. So whether you're BYU or Utah, or quite frankly, anybody who's not Texas Tech, the margin of error is very, very thin. Now, it shouldn't be. I think BYU had a legitimate beef for being left out this year. Utah didn't because they lost to BYU, right? But if you look at BYU's schedule, kind of the same deal as Utah's, okay? 1 bye. It's also early. It's after their 3 non-con games. Actually, no. They get Arizona early because they're taking on Notre Dame later on in Provo. Now, the Notre Dame-BYU game, if you're a BYU fan, if we're reading the tea leaves a little bit, like I said, the margin of error is very, very slim. But if you lose to Notre Dame, even though it's at home, and Notre Dame does turn out to be a legitimate contender for a college national championship, like a top 5 type team, you probably can still survive that as long as you beat Utah to get to the Big 12 championship game. But if you're BYU and you lose to Notre Dame and you go to the Big 12 championship game and lose to Texas Tech, we'll say, you're probably out. Because, again, a 2-loss Big 12 a 2-loss team that made it to the Big 12 championship game was out last year. And yes, your 2 losses would be to Notre Dame and Texas Tech, but this year your 2 losses were to Texas Tech. You're like a top 10 team, and you still couldn't get in. So I think for both Utah and BYU, the news today about the schedule release is actually good news. Now, we don't know times, okay, because those are set later on because of television partnership. But coming up November 7th here in Salt Lake, when BYU rolls into town, there's an excellent chance, and I can say this today and feel pretty confident in it, that will be a virtual play-in game for a berth in the Big 12 championship game. Because if you're Texas Tech, you're also breathing a sigh of relief that you avoid BYU and Utah as well. Because if I had to tier the conference today, Tier 1 would be Tech. They've proven it. They're by themselves. And then right behind them, BYU and Utah. And Tech avoids them. So, interesting stuff from the Big 12 schedule release coming out today. We'll do more of a deep dive on this coming up in about an hour from now. But we'll catch our first break of this Wednesday show and bring in our old buddy, Tony Jones, coming up on the other side of a Wednesday drive right here on ESPN 700. Night off for the Jazz tonight. We'll take on the Spurs coming up tomorrow in the midst of a 6-game home streak, and then they're going to hit the road come February. But a really impressive win for the Jazz last night. A lot of good moments from some of the youngsters. It hurts my heart to welcome in our next guest because he has left us, and I'm still mad at him. But Tony Jones on to bigger and better things, now covering the Philadelphia 76ers for The Athletic. TJ, happy Wednesday, buddy. How you doing?
Bigger things. Not sure better. How's everything?
Good, man, but we miss you. And I love that you continue to come on the show, but I speak for our entire market. We miss Tony Jones out here.
Man, I miss that. I almost said something that was not family friendly. I miss the heck out of you guys.
You can say hell on this show, Tony. You're safe.
Are we sure?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you off air what Stevenson Sylvester said on the show a few weeks ago. He told us a story of dunking on Greg Oden, and a certain body part made contact with another body part. So we're safe saying hell at this point.
I miss the HE double hockey sticks out of Utah.
There you go, bud. And we miss you too. So just give us an update on you. How are things going, and what's the latest as far as your new gig, and just kind of give us the Tony Jones update.
Well, I'm living in a 900 square foot apartment in South New Jersey that costs the same as the mortgage in my 3,500 square foot house in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. But I am having a blast covering the Sixers. It's been really interesting covering Joel Embiid and, watching Tyrese Maxey. It's been really, really fun watching VJ Etchcomb every single night because he's got a chance to one day be very, very good. So that, and it's fun. It's fun comparing the Philly crowd to the Utah crowd because I've been covering the Jazz for so long that I'm not used to seeing crowds that are liquored up. so that's been really interesting, and yeah, man, just really adjusting to life again on the East Coast. And I think the biggest irony of everything is that I had to go back east and leave Utah to see snow again. So there's that as well.
Yeah, it's true. We're having, I think I read today, it's going to be the lowest snowfall since like 1913 or something. And there's none in the forecast either, TJ, which is interesting. But let me, because I do want to ask you about the Jazz and some NBA big picture topics. But, as I reminded our listeners earlier, you were in our market for a number of years doing a number of different things, namely covering college football, covered college basketball. And you and I haven't spoke since Kyle Whittingham stepped down and is now the head coach at Michigan, which still feels odd to say. And Morgan Scalley has taken over here in Utah. So even though it's from a distance, what do you make of potentially the biggest sports news story we've had in our market, maybe ever, TJ, with the magnitude of the Michigan job?
Well, I think the unfortunate part of it is I think that there was a disconnect there that led to Kyle ultimately stepping down, because clearly, as him accepting the Michigan job shows and proves, he did not want to step down. He still wanted to coach, and he still has gas left in the tank. I think it's very unfortunate to see the Utah fan base, kind of at odds with Kyle for doing his job, which is, I left to go to Michigan. I'm going to fill my staff out, and if it comes, if guys are in the portal, if guys are in the portal, that's me doing my job. Not trying to, harm the Utah program in any way, because this is a billion-dollar industry. Everything is a business at this point. So, from that standpoint, I think those two things are unfortunate, especially, losing Moa to Michigan. That's a big thing. But, really excited next year to see how Morgan puts his stamp on his program. And I think that he's going to – I think the core of what Kyle built will always be in place. But I think, I'm excited to see, what wrinkles Morgan puts on his program in his way. So, I'm glad that he retained his two quarterbacks because I think those are really dynamic quarterbacks and they're building blocks in their franchise pieces. And it'll be interesting to see how he builds out the program from there.
The other massive college football story, TJ, involved a guy that you know well and covered, and Kalani Sitake reportedly was really close to agreeing to terms with Penn State. But BYU and their fan base and the deep pockets that they have down there were able to rally and keep Kalani. Now, Jay Hill has followed Coach Witt to Michigan because it's Michigan, and that's the deal. But Kalani was able to retain A-Rod, get a nice bump in pay for his assistants, and then have a guarantee of a very deep coffer of NIL resources. And look, man, they did not get got in the transfer portal like at all. They haven't lost very many players that were, set to come back to produce. The guys they did lose are guys like Chase Roberts, who graduated, and but they get L.J. Martin back, who was the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. They get their quarterback in Bear Bachmeier. And for the most part, they're pretty whole. And a couple of good additions in the transfer portal as well. On paper, in my opinion, they're the second best team to Texas Tech. So what do you make of the job Kalani has done now that we have about a decade on the job?
Well, I think that he's done the job that I expected him to do. When I covered him at the University of Utah when he was defensive coordinator, I thought that he was going to be a star in the coaching profession. The biggest thing that you judge by people's character is how they treat the people that they don't need to treat well, and Kalani always treated the people he doesn't need to treat well very, very well. And I've dealt with NBA athletes who don't necessarily do that. And it was just really refreshing to see just how good a person that he is. And you see that, you hear that universally about Kalani, which is he's as good a person, a good human being as there is out there. And he's built, much like Kyle did at Utah, he's built a culture that is going to roll over from year to year to year. And this is the year that he got a dynamic quarterback, and that kind of tied it all together. Bear Bachmeier is one day going to have a chance to win the Heisman Trophy. I firmly believe that because, I think that he's, as dynamic a quarterback, he reminds me, and I don't want to be blasphemous when I say this, but he reminds me of a right-handed Tim Tebow. And I think that with him on the roster and with the way Kalani's defenses roll over from year to year, with apologies to Jay Hill, who's obviously now elsewhere, they're going to have a chance to compete for the college football playoff. So, I think that next year they're going to be really good. They're going to be really dynamic, and they're going to be right there in the thick of things, just like they were this year.
Alex Jensen is in the early stages of what has been an entire rebuild. Kiana Dawes sticks around from a year ago, but this is a brand new team for the most part, and the results are showing it. They finally got their first Big 12 win the other day against TCU here in Salt Lake. They almost got K-State on the road last night. Now, K-State's not a great team, but just your thoughts on how you think this year is going to go for the Utes. I feel like, and the data more or less backs this up, Big 12 is probably the best basketball conference in America this year. There's some really good teams in the Big 10, and obviously the SEC was probably the best league a year ago. They've got two really good dynamic ball-in-hand guards in Terrence Brown and Don McHenry, but there's a little redundancy because they play very similar. The nights they look solid, their bigs really, step it up on the glass. Kiana's a beast, and then the Okonkwo kid at times looks like he could be an answer down low. But I anticipate this being a really, really rough, long year for Al. So just give me your thoughts on the current state of Utah men's hoops.
Yeah, they're the classic team that's not going to win a lot of games in conference. But at some point in the season, they're going to knock somebody off that they shouldn't knock off. We almost saw that a couple of weeks ago at the Huntsman Center with BYU. They were right in that game, right down to the end. And, guards dominate college basketball. And, the strength of this Utah team are those two guys. I wouldn't be surprised to see Terrence Brown get some NBA looks at the end of the season. He's already on the radar. I've spoken to a couple of teams that like him, not like him to draft him, but definitely like him to try to get him into the system and see what they have. So, I think they're going to have to build on that. I think with Coach Chills there, I think recruiting's eventually not going to be a problem. And I think the biggest thing that Alex has to do is he has to establish a culture. The kind of culture that rolls over from year to year. So the culture of discipline, the culture we're going to come out, we're going to defend, and we're going to get stops, and then everything kind of rolls over from that base. So, it'll be interesting to see what year 2 or year 3 looks like. I will say that, what we saw out at our Huntsman Center for the BYU game, I think, I speak for a lot of Utah fans when I say I'd like to see that every game. And part of that deal is going to be on Alex to get a team that's commiserate with that kind of fan support. But, the thing with the Marriott Center, man, even when BYU is relatively mediocre, that place is full and that place is rocking. And that's a true home court advantage. I'd like to see the Huntsman Center return to becoming a true home court advantage.
Yeah, it would make a massive difference. I've been talking about this for quite a bit. Like, you can't be the fan that complains that the basketball program is down if you're not willing to invest in the program yourself. Like, we need the community to show up. You know the deal. I mean, you go through a recruiting process, and if the coach marches you into a building that's 90% empty, you're like, why would I come here to play when I'm not going to play in front of fans? And the atmosphere at the Huntsman for the BYU game was awesome, but like 40% of the fans there were wearing blue, and that's fine. But if you're going to complain that there are BYU fans in your building, breaking news, go buy the tickets because you get first option. So as far as just being able to build the program, TJ, I think fan support would go a long way, not just for the interim, but for the future as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When Larry Kristoviak came in and, they got the line right and they built that program up, that was the best that we've seen the Huntsman Center since the Majerus days. And, and guess what? It's we can argue whether it's the chicken or the egg thing, but the results are clear, right? They got a great player. The line came in and largely turned the program around. Obviously, Jordan Loveridge and Jakob Pertl and Dakari Tucker, all of those guys, and Kyle Kuzma had a lot to deal with. Scott Chapman, wow, that was a heck of a team. But guess what? Why do you think, Scott Chapman stayed in state and said, okay, I'm going to go to Utah? Why were they able to get Kyle Kuzma, who was a high 4-star kid who had a pick of who had his pick of schools? Why were they able to get Dakari Tucker out of LA? People like that. Because the foundation of Larry's program was already built, and fans were showing up. Nobody wants to go and play for an empty house. So, you can argue whether, hey, is this a chicken or the egg thing? But, when Larry came in, and obviously it unraveled, but when Larry came in and had that thing at its peak, the fan support was there from year to year to year to year. And I think that, if you're a Utah fan and if you're the Utah fan base, you gotta aim to try to get back to that point.
Yeah, and hopefully, we can see Al build this thing up so, they're winning a little bit more, because that will help. In the Larry years, it's good that you brought those up. I thought Larry did a good job. And, anyway, the decision was made to move on. But before we get to the Jazz, I do have some draft stuff too. We saw BYU, as you referenced, here in Salt Lake not too long ago. And I've been watching a ton because I'm trying to get a feel for the type of pro that AJ is going to be. And every time I watch him, I'm more sold. But I'll tell you what, Rob Wright makes that team go, TJ. And, you know, I don't know the rest of the way how it's going to go. They lost against Tech on the road. Tech's a really good team. They do need, at this point, they need like a signature win. The best win they have is Wisconsin. They almost got UConn. There are plenty of chances left because they're going to see Arizona in Provo. They're on the road against Kansas. They got Arizona again. But overall, I feel like on paper, this is as talented of a college basketball team we've had in our state, maybe since Rick's best teams with Andre and Doliak and Britt and those guys. So your thoughts on this project? Kevin Young has been on the job now for a few years, and your thoughts on BYU basketball?
Well, I think this is a team with a Final Four ceiling. You know, not necessarily saying that, you know, they're going to make it that they're going to make it that far, but they have the capability of making that far because AJ is, you know, truly a franchise-changing guy, and I think I'm 98% sold that Richie Saunders is going to play in the NBA. You know, so I think they have two NBA guys on that roster. You know, I think that there are some weaknesses. I don't think there's enough shooting on the roster. I think Kennard Davis needs to start making more shots than he's been making because he's the guy that's been brought in to be the shooter, especially because, you know, Richie Saunders, he garners so much attention from defenses and so much gravity. So I think Kennard needs to start knocking some of those down. You know, I think Rob Wright is a little feast or famine for me. You can't deny the scoring ability. He is, you know, one of the most dynamic guys in college basketball. Off the dribble, he can get the spot, any spot that he wants to. He can score. You know, like we saw in Texas Tech before BYU somehow ran out of gas in that game. I mean, he put on a show in that second half. So, you know, I don't doubt that. Now, he's got to learn how to play point guard and be a playmaker and get guys the ball in spots, and he doesn't have that skill. And I think that's going to really hurt him when it comes to him trying to make it at the next level because he's, you know, 6', 6'1", and, you know, at that size, NBA teams, you know, while they love the scoring, you got to also do other things. You can't just be a scorer. So, you know, I think that those are some of the things that Rob has to work on as well. You know, I like the rim protection. I thought that, you know, there were a lot of cracks defensively in Texas against Texas Tech in the last 10 minutes. I don't necessarily ding them on that Texas Tech loss because that's a really, really, really good team. And, you know, they have, you know, obviously Jacob Toppin is terrific. The guard, Christian Anderson, right?
Yep.
Christian Anderson is as good as any guard in college basketball. And I think that he's going to end up being a first-round pick, if not a lottery pick. So, you know, that is a really good team. I also think Texas Tech, as we saw last year, I mean, they have Final Four potential as well. So I don't ding them for that loss. That's a hard game to close out on the road. You kind of wanted to see it all go to Kaka as fast as it did when they built that 9-point lead. But you know, you can't really fault BYU for losing that kind of game. That's an elite team. So, like you said, they're going to have, you know, a lot of marquee games left, a lot of chances for quality wins. If they win enough of them, they got a chance to be a top 2 seed. If they lose some of them, they're still probably going to be a 4 or 5 seed. They went out and played a very ambitious schedule, and AJ DeBanza is absolute box office. So, you know, that's a team that's going to bear watching, and you know, I think they have as high a ceiling as almost any team in college basketball.
Yeah, my only concern for them, if you're a BYU fan, they're a little top heavy. And if Rob gets hurt, I don't know who's going to handle the basketball. Maybe they just let AJ bring it up. I do think Richie's a pro. I didn't think that when he was a freshman. That's credit to Kevin and his ability to develop. But if we move into the space before we get to some Jazz stuff, fact of the matter is, we know the deal. They're going to try to hold on to the asset, and that's what they should do. It makes for a frustrating watch at times, but you can't lose a top 8 pick to the defending champs when you're in the middle of a rebuild and you live in Salt Lake City. So let's move over into the area of some draft stuff here. Most of the mocks that I read still have Darren Peterson at 1, and there's a lot to like. I don't know, man. Like every time I watch AJ, I just have a feeling that he's going to change the team, and maybe Darren will too. You don't have to say one is bad and the other is awesome, but if you had the number 1 pick overall this year and you're the Utah Jazz, you take who and why?
Oh, I'm taking Darren. He's the best American guard I've seen since Kyrie Irving, and he's an NBA starter today at 2 positions. You can put him at the point guard, you can start him. You can put him at the 2 guard, you can start him. I happen to think that he should pretty much just not play the rest of the year and get completely healthy because, every time he steps on the court, he's kind of getting dinged up and nicked up. But I think that he's a Hall of Fame level talent. And but the other thing is, I think AJ DeBance is a Hall of Fame level talent. Now, this is where I'm at as opposed to other people. Other people think that this is a 3-person race for the number 1 pick. I think it's a 2-person race. I think that Darren and AJ are better than Cam Boozer. And this is not to say that I don't think Cam Boozer doesn't have a chance to be a 5, 6, 7-time All-Star, because I think he does, and I think that he's got a chance to be, a guy who averages 20 points and 10 rebounds a game for a decade straight. I think that of Cam Boozer. But AJ and Darren, to me, are just better players. They're more well-rounded players. They're more dynamic players athletically, and they're just guys who profile, to me, higher than Cam Boozer does. So, I still have Cam Boozer at a solid 3. I think Caleb Wilson out of North Carolina is terrific. I think Kinston Flemings out of Houston is the top point guard on the board. I think that he is also terrific. Koa Pete down in Arizona. The list goes on and on. This is as good a draft class as I've seen in a long, long time.
I agree with you at the top. As I've watched, it's Darren, then it's AJ, and I do think Cam has a chance to be a really good player in the league. But with the way the game has changed at the pro level, yeah, I just both those two, in my opinion, are just ready to step in, play big minutes, and play big minutes right away. But let's move over to the Jazz before I set you loose. It's become a situation where now for the past few years, I'm just watching for moments because we know the deal. They're not going to be front-facing about being competitive every night. And for the first time in this now 4th year of a rebuild, I'm really starting to see some things. Like, we know Lowry's awesome. I don't need to see anything else from Larry Markkinen to know who he is. The Keontae stuff is real. I just give that kid so much credit for getting into the gym in the offseason and changing so many things about his habits. He hit 4 or 5 shots last night, TJ, over Gobert that were like next level. And then we're starting to see moments from Ace with his length, his athleticism, and the overall skill set that to me indicates you have to put him in a spot in your mind to be a big-time player as part of this team when it's competitive again in a few years. But what has stood out most to you about the Jazz this year, and what does that say about their plan moving forward?
Well, what stood out most to me about the Jazz this year is that they put their if they put their foot on the pedal, they could easily make the play-in, and once they get to the play-in, they could challenge for a playoff. Like, if they, let's say there's no Walker Kessler injury and Walker Kessler's available, and they play, Keontae and Lowry and everybody that they have every single game, this team is good enough to challenge for a playoff berth. What they're doing right now is out of necessity because they simply cannot let that pick go to Oklahoma City. But, there are a couple things that need to be said. I wish people would stop writing about the Jazz trading Lowry Markkanen. They're not. They have zero interest or next to zero interest in trading him. They've already gotten through what they feel is 95% of the rebuild, and the only thing left for them to do is retain the pick, make the pick at the end of the year, and take $50 million in cap space and go and try to get some veterans to support, what the core is. They have to make some decisions. They want to keep Walker Kessler in free agency, so I would expect team control to win out there, and I would expect Walker Kessler to, even if he goes out and gets an offer, I'd expect him to be back with the Jazz next year. But the leap of Keontae has kind of changed things. I think that I think that he's been all-star level good this year. I think he should be in the all-star game. I don't know that he's going to make it, but I think that he should be in the conversation. The fact that he's gotten to this level and Lowry is at this level and he's in his prime, I think that you're seeing some good things out of Ace as of late. And if you add another lottery pick to the mix, and heck, if the Jazz actually get lucky and get one of the top 3 picks, then they're kind of cooking with gas. I mean, take this core. You have Keontae at the 1, you have Bryce Sensabaugh at the 2, you have Ace Bailey at the 3, you have Lowry Markkanen at the 4, you have Walker Kessler at the 5. Now close your eyes and imagine that the Jazz get one of the top 2 picks in the draft, and they get to take either AJ DeBanza or Darren Peterson and add to that mix. They're a playoff team right away. Full stop. They're a playoff team right away. So, I think that the Jazz are in a good spot. They're doing what they have to do this year, and they're going to try to see if they can finally, the lottery guys kind of finally smile on them a little bit.
Yeah, it's been encouraging, because you got to change your prism with how you're watching, understanding what they're trying to do. So hopefully next year we'll see a step in the right direction and maybe knock on the door for a legitimate playoff spot. TJ, are you coming back in town anytime soon, my friend?
I'll be there in March.
All right, man.
So listen, I got to make a shout out to B Will spot because, when I get there in March, I'm coming with my 5. I'm going down there with my 5, and I'm getting wins on the basketball court all night long.
All right. Love it, man. Well, and when you're here, you better come in studio for an hour because we miss you, okay?
I'm coming in studio for an hour.
Love it.
I'm there.
Okay.
You got me.
Okay, be safe, buddy. We miss you. Nothing but love, okay?
Miss you guys too, man. Appreciate you.
All right, great Tony Jones, who was in our market for a number of years, covering a bunch of different things, which is why we talked about all of them. He's now covering the Sixers for The Athletic. You can get him on social media at T Jones on the NBA. Five Finger Death Punch. It's a real band. It's taking over the Utah First Credit Union Amphitheater on September the 22nd. Tune in to the Sean O'Connell Show at 1:30 for your chance to win a pair of tickets to the event. More details on ESPN700sports.com. All right, we'll switch gears. We'll do some college football coming up with Quinn McClain from Sumer Sports. We have Tim McMahon and Craig Bowler, Jack. We got a busy Wednesday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. All right, we got our buddy Tim McMahon joining us today from ESPN. Craig Bolerjack, TV voice of the Utah Jazz, will be our guest later on. But the college football season has come and gone, but there's never a bad time to talk college football. So we'll welcome in our friend Quinn McLean from Sumer Sports on a Wednesday. Hello, young man. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good. I appreciate your time as always. So let's start with what feels like a very historic moment for Indiana. I mean, it is in so many different ways. But my question to you, Quinn, is what can be learned from other programs? Of course, we're a mile away from where Utah football plays and 40 miles away from where BYU football plays. But the job that Kirk Cignetti just did in 2 years, what are the main takeaways?
Yeah, I think the big look is like portal strategy. I think a lot of schools are going back to the drawing board in terms of how they attack the portal. And I think the main thing I looked at from Cignetti was he took a lot of guys that were risers from FCS to G5 to P5. And so getting those guys peaking at the right time and dominating lower levels of competition so that they're ready for the next stage. I think that was something that a lot of P4 programs were a little bit hesitant to do because obviously they're not proven against good talent, but Cignetti just showed if you get quality guys that want to take on the next competition level, go after those guys. And a lot of those guys came with him at James Madison. He was able to add people to the portal, get some notoriety. I actually think they have a stellar portal class this year going into next year. Probably one of the best ones that had, just getting other talent from that. So I think the old adage that a lot of people would say is, go through my old recruits, after their freshman year, check on them, see if they're still happy at their old place. To transfer them in, go, look at 247, all these other sites, see who the top 5 and 4 stars are, see if they're still happy at the other place. I don't know if that strategy has really worked. I think if you are a guy that was a former 4-star or 5-star and had multiple stops, I think that's a lot of independent evaluations that told you that maybe you've not lived up to that 4 and 5 stars. So I think that's the big thing from a personnel standpoint I look to. And if you look at the Indiana defense, one thing I've always been pretty impressed from that is they don't try to do a whole lot in the sense of like complexity. Obviously, there's a lot of simulated pressures and guys blitzing from different angles, but every single 11 guy on that defense has a singular job. They know it. I like to watch the linebackers on that offense because they, cover multiple gaps. They know that those are the gaps. They don't have to worry about the other people on the team. It's pretty simplistic, and they try to boil that down and make everyone kind of own their job. And I think that's something that, from a scheme standpoint, you can take away from that defense.
You referenced their portal class, and I'm going to ask you if Indiana football is built to last and ask you if Indiana football can replicate even kind of what they just did. But the undercurrent, Quinn, of that question is it even possible to analyze if any team is built to last with the ever-changing nature of the sport now?
Yeah, it's really hard. We look at, stability of team year to year. I think we're starting to see the sports divulge a little bit into what we see in the NCAA basketball, where you have a new mid-major programs are rising to do upsets from all different conferences. You're going to start to see that in college football. It's too early to tell in terms of stability of that. I think some colleges have worked well from getting a new quarterback in the portal year to year. You see Oregon has had a new quarterback every single year, and that's used to work out well. And Indiana seems to, they just get Josh Hoover from TCU. It's more of a plug and play to their system to where it should work out for them, and Miami in the national championship as well. I think some schools are not waiting around for the development of players, which is something we've seen at the NFL level that quarterbacks haven't been able to develop over a long time frame. It's now carrying down to college. These programs are under a lot of pressure to win now. Players aren't really going to get the development, and so I'm wondering where that development comes from.
Yeah, very fair question, and that's why I'm chuckling as I'm asking you questions about next year because we're all just giving our best guess. But I did want to get your perspective on what has been a massive news cycle here in Salt Lake concerning Kyle Whittingham stepping down after 21 years as Utah's coach and now taking the job at Michigan. He took 6 Utah coaches with him. He took 4 players as well and then 1 recruit. So 5 total players that Morgan Scalley was going to be counting on next year have followed Witt Ann Arbor. So what do you make of the decision for Michigan to go after Witt, and how do you think Michigan's going to be next year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the series of unfortunate events with Michigan and everything that's happened with them this year, I don't know if Witt would have been in that opportunity to take that job from an outside perspective. I think from everyone's standpoint, this was a normal succession plan for Morgan Scalley to take over the coach with, obviously coached at Utah forever. A huge opportunity opens like that. I think you take it. I don't think it's anything burned towards Utah in that aspect. Although, the talent he did take with them to Michigan, J.J. Buchanan, Smith Snowden, John Henry Daly, those are sizable players. I think the biggest loss for Utah is taking Jason Beck with them. We saw what Jason Beck in 1 year at Utah was able to do and transform that offense. Now with a prolific quarterback in Bryce Underwood and, the recruits that they're able to get, I think that's the offense to watch out for in the Big Ten next year. And as the Big Ten has started to evolve as this juggernaut of a conference, the last 3 national title winners have come from it. I think it'll be interesting to see how Whittingham, with getting a lot more recruits, does in the future.
So moving over now to the University of Utah, the Big 12 released their schedule today. And there's so many schools in the Big 12 that are replacing quarterbacks. And Utah football's got a lot of question marks. They have 2 first-round tackles leaving, a group of offensive linemen taking off. Their O-line coach and Jim Harding left, and they've got to rebuild the trenches on the other side of the football as well. As you referenced, John Henry Daly leaving for Ann Arbor. But what do you know about Kevin McGivern, and what sort of offense do you think we should be expecting with both quarterbacks back under center?
Yeah, I think it worked really well for them. So if a smart OC like that came in with the talent that they have, utilize running quarterbacks that you have in terms of the capability of Dampier and Burt Ficklin going into the season. I'd like to see a big year from Wayshawn Parker this year. I think that he showed a lot of capability as the guy in that offense. I think the big question mark for me is who's going to, in going into the season, we talked about it, like who's going to step up as the primary pass receiver. One guy they got in the portal that caught my eyes is Braden Pegan from Utah State. 94 targets, 60 catches, 920 receiving yards this year, only 2 drops. So that's a pretty competent acquisition for the Utah offense. Utah, as we know, likes to go sideline to sideline. So you get a guy that has very capable hands, kind of steps into that Ryan Davis role. I think you're kind of replacing what you had last year and hoping that you have that year-to-year stickiness. I think on defense, obviously losing John Henry Daly, Fano declaring as well. I think they have to get better at run defense. That was something that was gashing them the entire season. And if they're able to figure that out and kind of improve their scheme a little bit, which, Scalley's been there forever in the sense of running that down, I think that's a big improvement for Utah going into the next season. Their schedule, as you mentioned, is pretty favorable. The ones I kind of circled is like early tests or things that I'm looking out for. Kansas could be a hard game for them. Jalen Daniels is declared for the NFL, but I think the reason why I have that, Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinator at Penn State, has transferred to Kansas. I think is one of the top 5 schemers in all of college football. He gets very creative with the personnel packages that can always give teams issues in terms of personnel matching. And so that's the one I've circled as like an interesting game to watch out for. Houston, I think Houston quietly has had a really good portal. Mekhi Hughes, Ashton Porter from Oregon, Trent Walker, who's the leading receiver at Oregon State, has come over. Luke Carney, quarterback from Syracuse, has come over. I think they're putting together holes for them to be pretty quiet or pretty competitive in this. But I think Utah could go all the way undefeated up until the Holy War next year. And I think that's going to be make or break for them in the conference.
I agree. And let's move over now to Brigham Young, who was able to retain their head coach after Penn State came after Kalani Sitake. They do lose Jay Hill to Michigan. Gennaro Guilford is following them as well. As far as the transfer portal goes, Quinn, they didn't lose a ton. I think a lot of people were a little bit nervous that more players would follow Witt to Michigan from BYU than actually did. They bring back Bear Bachmeier. They bring back L.J. Martin. They have to replace 2 of their top 3 wide receivers. Chase Roberts graduated. But again, there's not a lot to look at as far as losses in the portal that I think is, Jack Kelly graduates. That's tough. He was awesome. Tanner Wall. Carson Ryan had a good year, Utah transfer. But same question that I asked you about Utah, I'll ask you about BYU. Your thoughts on where we're at with them, and also a schedule that does not include Texas Tech. So they've got a shot, I think, to make some noise in the Big 12 next year as well.
Yeah, I think BYU has a very favorable schedule. Obviously, the big one is October 17th against Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I think, reloaded at a huge clip in the portal this year, getting a pair of high-name defensive players on their team, and they have to play Arizona State. And I think Arizona State getting Cutter Boley from Kentucky is a very underrated acquisition. I'd never doubt Dillingham in terms of the quarterbacks he gets to the portal because he always gets them in top shape. Those are the two I think would be giving them issue for them. But in terms of what BYU did in the portal, I really like their acquisition in terms of Uave from Cal. I think he had an excellent year at linebacker for them, and I think that's something that provides a lot of value for BYU in terms of stopping the run. He's definitely a run stopper all over the field. One underrated signing for them, Kyler Casper from Oregon. He's 6'6" receiver. He is a big dude in terms of he never was able to get on the field at Oregon, but I don't think that really justifies his pass catching ability. I think Bear Bachmeier needs guys that are able he can locate and get the ball to, and so I'm looking for a big season from him in terms of improving his capability. Not only we know him as a good runner, but also just an accurate quarterback. I've watched a lot of film on Chase Roberts as we go into the NFL draft. Getting the ball in place, I think Chase Roberts bailed him out in a lot of cases in terms of catching the ball out of there. I think that's something that Bear Bachmeier has to improve next year, is throwing a little bit more catchable ball to players.
Since you do some of the draft stuff, I glossed over and just mentioned the fact that Utah football has to replace 2 generationally special tackles. And I read today that there's only been 4 drafts in the modern era where 2 teammates on the offensive line were drafted in the first round. But most of the mocks I've seen, Quinn, have Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu off the board in the first round. Do you think that's what we're going to see?
Yeah, definitely. I think given the scarcity of offensive tackle, Fano and Lomu become a little bit more instantly valuable since they're premium positions, and smart teams will try to trade back and get them in capable hands. Right now, Fano is most mocked to Cleveland Browns as far as an upgrade to their offensive line. Cleveland just needs to get a lot younger on the offensive line, and so I think he's a valuable pickup for them in terms of making that offensive line better. Obviously, Cleveland has needs in terms of a lot of different positions, but I think for them, finding value and getting towards an expensive position for them, I think is something that a smart organization such as Cleveland would do. Caleb Lomu, right now, he is most mocked also to Cleveland at 25%, but also to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think that one's an interesting fit at 23. With all the, contract extensions that the Eagles have to give out in the next few years on defense, and this is just good organizations drafting well, they have to get younger on offense. And I think with their offensive line, the Eagles, I would see them drafting a lot on offense, and Caleb Lomu makes a lot of sense for them at late first round for the Eagles.
So Texas Tech, who is the class of the Big 12, and if we had to tier the conference, they'd probably be in a tier of their own. They're the team that kept BYU out and, in a way, kept Utah out as well. Now, Utah lost to Brigham Young in addition to Texas Tech, but they are losing David Bailey, Romello Height. I was on the field when Tech was here. They are animals. Jacob Rodriguez was awesome. He's gone as well. They lose Baron Morton, but I feel like Brennan Sorsby is a better quarterback than Baron Morton. So let's move over to the Texas Tech side of things. And I think if you're Tech, you see the schedule released today, and you avoid BYU and Utah, who are probably the second and third best teams in the conference, at least on paper. What are your expectations for Texas Tech next year?
I think, they're obviously the favorites to win the Big 12. Their portal class this year is obviously, in my opinion, might be better than last year's class. And That's saying a lot given that what they was able to reload on the defensive line. They got Trey White from San Diego State, who had a stellar year for them, and all the numbers that San Diego State was able to put on the defensive side. Probably one of the most coveted defensive tackle in all of the portal this year. Mateen Baragba from Wake Forest. If you've ever watched him on film, that guy has as much of a lethal first step as you can imagine. Someone that is a bigger and more capable size than what you saw as Lee Hunter this past season. They're able to fill in for that. Adam Trick is an underrated person for them. He comes from Miami, Ohio, 6'4", 249. He had a great year for them. I think they're doing smart things in terms of spending a lot of money, and we can say that since we're in the NIL era, at premium positions. And so if you want to win and be in the college football playoffs, you need to spend at defensive line and quarterback. And they're showing that that's something that they're going to do year in, year out and be competitive. Austin Romaine, another guy from Kansas State, linebacker. Obviously, big shoes to fill in terms of Jacob Rodriguez going to the NFL draft. But if there's a guy that I think is close to that level, it's probably Austin Romaine from Kansas State this year. So, yeah, I think they did a great job so far in the portal, and they have a really good strategy so far.
This is a totally random question, Quinn, and if you have nothing on them, that's fine. But Utah's non-con schedule features Arkansas. And a quick glance indicates that they struggled a tad bit last year at 0-8 in conference and 2-10 overall. Do you have any idea as to what sort of challenge Utah football is going to face with Arkansas coming to Salt Lake?
I know they're pretty well coached. Ryan Sutherfield coming down from Memphis has always had a very capable offense. Arkansas is kind of a hard one, too, because obviously they had the coaching change last year. I think Talon Green, the quarterback there, is as athletic as a quarterback we'll see in this NFL draft this upcoming season. He gets injured, and so that derails their season a little bit. It's hard for me to place stock in Arkansas from 2025, given a lot of the weapons they had were injured and then the coaching change. And so if I were to look at a lot of statistics, it would be a huge asterisk on Arkansas from 2025.
Another random question as I'm seeing news spill in. Utah football just picked up a tight end commit from Oklahoma State named Will, I believe it's Money. He's a local kid from Springville. Is the transfer portal closed or not, Quinn? I don't know what's going on.
You can, as of yesterday, you can put your name into the transfer portal. And
okay.
So I think a lot of the news that you're hearing is guys that may have already put their names in, but they're reported on. There's usually that few days buffer of the news. They don't have to move to a new team until I think like a week or so before the start of the season.
Got it.
So, and then the national championship teams, they have an extended deadline in the college football playoff. I think it's a week or so after they exit the college football playoff. So you'll start to see a little bit more of names of people being committed. I think there's still about 2,000 guys in the portal. They can still return to their teams if they want to, but to put your name into the portal to be consideration is that like 1 or 10-day window.
Got it. If I took Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah off the table, because we've already talked about them, what other Big 12 teams do you think will have something to say about who wins the conference championship next year?
I like Arizona State. I mean, I think that Kenny Dillingham has done a really good job with the quarterbacks he's had coming in there. And I think Cutter Boley is going to surprise a lot of people in the conference, as I touched on earlier. Obviously, you're losing Raleek Brown to Texas. Jordan Tyson's going to the draft, probably a top 10 pick. But I think, what we've learned of Dillingham, he's taken a lot of quarterbacks that have struggled at other places and really elevated them. We saw what he did with Bo Nix at Oregon. We saw what he's done with Sam Levitt coming in from Michigan State. I think if you had a guy such as Cutter Boley in an unfortunate situation at Kentucky and played, I think, decently, you're able to scheme around him. So I think that's a guy or a team in the conference that I think will outperform a lot of expectations. DJ Lagway with Baylor, I think, is intriguing to me, especially going up against Auburn and Atlanta to start, early in the season. I think that's an interesting matchup for them. But outside of BYU, Utah, Texas Tech, I think those are kind of the three-headed monster of the Big 12. Arizona State maybe 4 there.
All right, I want to move over here because BYU's non-con features Notre Dame. The game is in Provo. And, of course, this is an interesting matchup as Notre Dame elected to tap out of the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And BYU ended up playing Georgia Tech. Jeremiah Love is going to come back. I think a lot of people thought he was gone. They returned the C.J. Carr kid as well, who had a really good freshman year. So what is BYU up against when Notre Dame rolls into Provo next year?
Notre Dame, I think, is pretty stacked going into. You have another year of C.J. Carr in that offense. So obviously he's a very efficient passer, doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes. I think you get a little bit more confidence from him. Obviously, this matchup is the 2 college football snubs from the previous year. So I think there's a lot for both these teams in the competition against each other to showcase out of that. Notre Dame, I think, has had a great portal. They went out and got Keon Keeley from Alabama, who's defensive end that's had a lot of production the last few years. DJ McKinney is coming in from Colorado. Quincy Porter was a 5-star wide receiver at Ohio State that's come in. Tion Gray was at Oregon. He got a lot of snaps for them in a rotational. Now he's got a starting role. I think he's got to pop out for a great year for them. Letting Kenny Minchie walk to Kentucky, I think, is an interesting pick. as we've learned with the college football playoffs, if you're a team that's trying to get into extended runs to that, you're going to need your depth. So having a guy like him walk, I think, is interesting for Notre Dame. But obviously, the guy wants to start elsewhere, let him go. So I like Notre Dame a lot, and to return a lot of the defensive backs that brought him to the national championship that are still there, still young, still improving, and then to add Jeremiah Love, who will probably be the most confident college football player next year, obviously a Heisman Trophy contender. I think there is something to watch out for.
Last thing before I say you lose, outside of the teams that we've discussed, and we just kind of broke down Notre Dame. Looking at the odds, I mean, Indiana and Ohio State are the favorite next year. Then there's Texas, Notre Dame, Oregon, Georgia, LSU right there as well. Just if I asked you for, I don't know, however many teams you want to give us, 2, 3, 4, how many teams would you say right now you're confident that will be in the mix to maybe win the national championship next year?
Probably 6. I'd probably put Ohio State in that bunch as well. I think they reloaded quietly. They took like the entire Alabama defensive line in the portal this year, and they were able to get Justin Martin from Maryland, who I think is a very capable backup in case that Julian Stanton doesn't work out. I think these smarter teams are trying to build through depth as they know that, as you saw with Oregon in the college football playoff, they had a linebacker, their second running back, in that final game because they're so banged up. And so I think 6 teams would put in that. I think Texas, you could probably put in that as well. I'm more confident Arch Manning, and obviously they spent a lot to get Cam Coleman, the Auburn receiver, Raleek Brown. I think 6 feels right there.
Quinn, I appreciate the time, man. Where can people go find your work?
Yeah, I'm at Quinn's Wisdom, and I work at Sumer Sports. We actually, for the NFL playoffs, I know I mostly talk about college football, we have an app out that people can look at called Sumer Live, and so it's all live advanced charting data as the NFL playoffs are evolving. So anything from route trees to coverage concepts, you can get at your fingertips to watch alongside as you're watching the NFL playoffs.
Okay, bud. Appreciate the time. Have a great week, and we'll chat soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, Quinn McLean, Sumer Sports. He told you all the touch points where you can go find his work if you're a college football fan. All right, we got an open segment coming up. So we'll get into some of the schedule stuff. This Big 12 schedule was released today. So we know the opponents. We don't know the times because that will be basically put into place by television partners for both BYU and Utah. We'll do some big picture Big 12 stuff as well. But before we catch a break, new year, new you. All right, I want to tell you about my friends at Game Day Men's Health. Love having them on the station because I work with them personally. Okay, some of our clients I just don't have personal experience with. I do with Game Day Men's Health. So here's the deal. January is kind of the month where we all set our, I think the kids call them intentions. You're manifesting, whatever the hell that means. Old people call them resolutions, right? So at this point, we're 3 weeks in. Did you set a resolution to get in shape? Did you set a resolution to lose a little weight? Well, it's not too late, okay? Now, if you have tried to get in shape as you've aged a little bit, you know that it's just harder than it was when you were in your 20s or you were a teenager. So a couple of years ago, I set a goal. Said, I want to get in the best shape I've ever been in as an adult. So cleaned up some habits, started eating really clean, hit the gym, was doing yoga, doing all the things that I thought was supposed to work. And after a few months, I'm like, I'm not seeing very much progress. And I was at dinner with a buddy. I was telling him about it. He said, have you ever tried to supplement testosterone? I said, nope. I've heard that's a thing, but that's a thing for like athletes and celebrities and rich people. He's like, no, go to Game Day Men's Health and just take the consultation. And then they're going to set up a plan and just see if it works. So made an appointment with our friends at Game Day Men's Health. They gave me a free consultation, which they're offering you as a listener to the show. And they take a little bit of blood, do a little bit of blood work, and then they go over your levels with you. And then they set a plan in place for you to follow if you want to get in really good shape, if you want to lose a little weight, if you want to lose a lot of weight. Because they've got the weight loss stuff, the semaglutide, tirzepatide. It's more affordable there than it is anywhere. Now, for me, I utilize testosterone therapy and some of their peptides. And within the next 2 months, I had made like 5 times the progress than I did in the previous 2 months. Kids call it biohacking, and it's very affordable with this deal they're offering you. So go to GameDayMen'sHealth.com, schedule a free consultation, and if you mention that you heard me talking about it on my show, they're going to give you 50% off your first year membership. Now, if you've heard me talk about them and you've waited, well, you actually did a smart thing because breaking news, it's January. Breaking news, January is the first month of the year. And when they say 50% off your membership all year, it is every single month. So if you call them in November, you got a 50% off deal for a couple of months. Well, if you call them now, you get 50% off for the entire year. Okay, so I can promise you it works because it worked for me. Go to GameDayMen'sHealth.com, schedule your free consultation, and then tell them you heard me talking about it. They're going to knock 50% off of your membership for the first year. It's our good friends at Game Day Men's Health. All right, we'll catch a break. The Big 12 schedule was released today. We're going to talk about it coming up on the other side of a Wednesday drive right here on ESPN 700. You can experience the heart-pounding thrill of PBR, not the beer, professional bull riding at the Delta Center, February 6th to the 7th. I mean, maybe they serve PBR at the Delta Center. You could have a PBR and watch the PBR, not judging. Tune in to OC, Sean O'Connell, daily at noon for your chance to win a pair of tickets. Our buddy Tim McMahon is going to join us a little bit later. Craig Bowlerjack will stop by as well. All right, Porter, during the break, I broke some news to you about a potential opportunity that I'm weighing, and it's steeped in irony. I was actually texting with our buddy Zach Harper last night. He was watching the Jazz game. And, you know, it's well known that Zach pretends like he likes Pitbull when he comes on the show. We know that deep down inside that that's not true.
Mr. Worldwide.
Indeed. So that's the shtick. Well, there's a Pitbull concert coming to Salt Lake City. I've been asked to film a video for social media where I'm dressed like Pitbull. So I put on one of those things where I would look bald like him, and I'd have to put on an outfit that looks like Pitbull's, and I'd have to release it on social media promoting Pitbull's upcoming concert.
I think if you do it, you got to go all out. You can't do the bald cap. You can't sell it.
I'm not shaving my head to promote Pitbull's concert.
Then don't do it.
Well, no, ultimately,
if you're not all in.
No, you know me. I am not in the way. I am all in.
I don't know.
Do we have a Morgan Scally catchphrase yet? Because that was weird. You're either all in or in the way.
Not really, because his is more defensive backfield oriented, right? The
Smart, nasty.
RSNB thing.
What does that stand for again?
Relentless,
yeah.
Smart, nasty ball hawks.
That's how I played. That's how I approach the day.
Right.
That's how I approach life.
So he may have to come up with a more encompassing catchphrase. Maybe Mr. Worldwide. I don't know.
Okay. So Witt had the all in or in the way. You will become us. We will not become you. Family on 3.
There you go.
Right. We have yet to hear from Morgan Scally about what does Kalani have one? Oh, yes. Lead with love. Correct.
I like that.
Don't the Jazz? No, that was a Clarkson thing. And he's now a member of the New York Knicks, who, by the way, aren't very good right now.
What's going on there?
Well, that's what happens when you fire a good coach and hire a mediocre one.
This is true.
All right. Takeaways from Utah's football schedule, Porter, today. Well, you started the show off with a few thoughts here, but let's dig a little bit deeper. And I'm telling you, man, I think if you're Utah or BYU, you are looking at your schedule. And there are, look, the exercise of going game by game and being like, win, loss, win, like, you can't do that in January. But we kind of went over this, you know, Kansas, as Quinn kind of reminded us, they get Penn State's old OC. If I took BYU off the table, Porter, you cannot choose BYU. Toughest game on Utah's schedule next year, in your opinion, is who and why?
I can't say Notre Dame.
No, Notre Dame's not on Utah's schedule.
Sorry, I thought you said BYU.
No, like I'm taking BYU off the table. I mean, typically it would be at Iowa State, but zero clue what they're going to look like next year with a brand new coaching staff and replacing everybody. Arizona, Noah Fafita is back again, but TCU is replacing a quarterback. I mean, Houston, but that's a home game.
Right.
Cincinnati's replacing a quarterback. I have zero frame of reference for even how to believe Colorado football is going to look anymore. I mean, the Deion stuff has been so weird. It was such a meteoric rise, and everybody thought that he was building a national championship contender. And now there are people in Colorado that are sick of him and want him gone. If I answer my own question, I would probably say at Arizona is the second toughest game besides BYU and Salt Lake. Is there another game you would even throw in there?
No, you're probably right. You know, it's that one. It's Colorado, TCU, and that should be welcome news for Utah fans, right? You mentioned the Houston, the Cincinnati ones. Kind of depends on the quarterbacks there. For the most part, Spence, if you're Utah and you look at this schedule, we'll see what Arkansas can pull together as an SEC team with plenty of resources. But you really should feel confident about being 6-0 going into Houston, right? Now, the back half of the schedule is a lot more difficult for Utah, both with the opponents and the fact that you have more road games. You're at Arizona, you're at TCU, you're at Cincinnati, and you're at Colorado. So some of your tougher opponents are on the road. But, man, you're getting to that bye week and you're getting into Kansas at home, and you really should feel like you're about a month and a half into the season, a month and a half into Morgan Scalley's tenure. You should be unblemished. Like I said, we'll see what Arkansas can throw together. That's an SEC team with a bunch of dollar signs that they can do some things with. But, yeah, TCU, at Arizona, at Cincinnati, at Colorado, and then the home game versus BYU. Those are your toughest games all year long. Now, all of those are on the back half of your schedule, so I think that's something to be weighed in part of this as well.
Only one back-to-back on the road. So Noah Fafita, he, like I said, he comes back. He was all Big 12 first team last year, and Arizona, kind of under the radar, was sneaky at the end of the season. 5 straight wins before they lost to SMU, but that was a bowl game that featured a lot of opt-outs. They beat Cincinnati. They beat Arizona State. So that, to me, just at first glance, might be the game you watch out for. TCU is ranked in the top 20 in the far too early top 20 stuff that ESPN's already put out there. They're going to have to replace their quarterback. You do miss Arizona State, as I referenced earlier, and I thought Quinn gave us some good perspective on Arizona State and what they could look like coming up next year. But again, Sam Leavitt is no longer there, and he has moved on. I don't know, man. My gut tells me it's Arizona. So that back-to-back stretch, when it comes to Arizona and TCU, that's kind of where I'm leaning at this point. Now, when you look at the other Big 12 teams and the schedules that they have, we've talked a lot about Utah avoiding Texas Tech and Utah avoiding Arizona State. BYU also avoids Texas Tech, but obviously what that means is that Texas Tech avoids both BYU and Utah. And if I had to tier it right now, I think Tech has shown that we should tier this conference with one team at the top. Okay, they curb stomped Brigham Young twice. They came here to Salt Lake and ran away from Utah in the fourth quarter after a 3-quarter rock fight. David Bailey gone, Romello Height gone. Their 2 defensive ends are probably going to be first or second round draft picks. Jacob Rodriguez was awesome. They're losing Baron Morton, but they replaced him with Brendan Sorsby from Cincinnati, and that is probably an upgrade. So as of now, Tech is clearly the class of the conference. And then I would put BYU at 2. I think they've earned it. You know, they've beat Utah 3 straight times, 11 wins for the second straight year. And, you know, they lock up Kalani. They're able to maintain the bulk of the returning players they were expecting to contribute. They do have to replace Chase Roberts and Carson Ryan. Tanner Wall was a good safety for them, but they did a good job in the transfer portal, mostly running interference to not lose the players that they wanted to keep. And then I think I'd feel pretty comfortable putting Utah right there. But, you know, TCU, Josh Hoover gone. They're bringing in the Jaden Craig kid who was the Harvard quarterback, so he's a nerd. Just kidding. He was very good. So we'll see if that's an upgrade. A lot of teams in this conference are replacing quarterbacks. And in this is Schleba, I think. He's got TCU at 20. Okay. He has Arizona State at 23. So he has Texas Tech at 7. Okay. Let's just do this in order. Texas Tech at 7. He has BYU at 11, right ahead of Oklahoma and just behind Texas A&M. And then the next Big 12 team he has in his rankings, TCU at 20. And then it's Arizona State at 23. And then Utah at 25. So if we just go off these rankings, and you know, these are data-driven. They're taking in transfer portal additions and, you know, departures and returning players. Yeah, this is Mark Schleba. Mark is bright. I'm glad I'm reading this one. If we take this into consideration, then maybe it is the TCU game on the road that will provide the biggest test. Now, as we talked about with Quinn McLean from Sumer earlier, trying to predict this sport, trying to predict this sport on a week-to-week basis is an exercise in futility, let alone trying to predict this sport as far as what it will look like in September as we sit here in mid-January. But schedule release day, obviously it's one of the biggest days of the offseason in college football. Now, if we move over to BYU, okay, also a very manageable non-con, at least early on. Now, they're going to get Notre Dame and Provo, okay, and that's going to be obviously the biggest test for them all year long. Utah Tech, Arizona, they're moving Arizona up in the schedule to make space for Notre Dame later on. Then they're at Colorado State and Fort Collins. Arizona's at home. Okay, like I said, we already went over this. Arizona was kind of under the radar, good down the stretch, winning 5 straight football games before losing their bowl game to SMU. BYU has to go to Fort Worth as well. So at TCU, game to watch out for. BYU undressed them this year in Provo. They get Iowa State at home. Okay, and again, with a lot of questions about Iowa State, what they're going to look like. Now, the Notre Dame game provides such an interesting opportunity and dynamic for Brigham Young on the schedule. So if you move over to Notre Dame, first of all, they were awesome this year. You know, we know the deal. This game, Notre Dame BYU, was supposed to be the game that we got in the Pop-Tarts Bowl before Notre Dame decided to take their ball and go home. We chatted with Ted Roberts about this, friend of the show, a Notre Dame alum, and he and I just disagree. I thought it was cowardly. I thought it was weak. And I understand the statement you're trying to make because the article I read estimated that, well, I guess it's Disney who owns ESPN, and not like Disney, you know, they lost 20 to 30 mil based off the Notre Dame brand. I don't know how to quantify that. But the fact that it's BYU Notre Dame when this was supposed to be the matchup, for the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and two of the teams that, look, I think it's fair to say BYU had a very legitimate beef about being left out of the CFP, okay? But Notre Dame did too. Like, just because they're the teams around the outside looking in doesn't mean you should dismiss the case. Now, the bottom line is go win your football games. You know, Notre Dame's losses were early in the season. Then they figured it out, and they were awesome. And if you're BYU, you just got by Tech twice. And Tech got undressed by Oregon in the CFP. I mean, you know, we do have to kind of draw the lines there. Notre Dame in Schlabach's way too early top 25 is at 3. Okay, so they're bringing back Jeremiah Love. A lot of people thought he was gone. A lot of people thought he was going to the NFL. They're bringing back their quarterbacks, the C.J. Carr kid, who as a freshman was really, really good. Marcus Freeman flirted a little bit with the NFL, apparently, but he is back in South Bend. And we talked about this through the prism of the College Football Playoff Committee essentially telling us, and if we're honest, they told us early that the Big 12 is a one-bid league as long as it is a 12-team CFP. Now, if they expand it to 16, which a lot of people believe they're going to, and there's a thought process out there that they should expand it beyond that, then we'll have a different conversation about what Utah and BYU have to do to get in. But until that expansion happens, what Marcus Freeman said when he was on the coverage of the College Football National Championship game is he's telling his team now it's just time to leave no doubt, okay? Don't put it in the hands of the committee that seems to have this arbitrary process where they move the goalposts almost week to week to week, and it's like, what exactly are we doing here? Just leave no doubt. I mean, Notre Dame, as I'm looking at their schedule, I think they're going to be not just favored, but heavily favored in every game outside of 2. And they're probably going to be favored in these other 2. So the 2 games on their schedule, they're home against Miami. And, of course, Miami beat them a year ago and kept them out of the CFP. And for all of Indiana's brilliance, Miami proved to be a worthy opponent and played Indiana as good as anybody all year, maybe outside of Penn State for one half. So Miami's replacing a bunch. Obviously, Carson Beck and a bunch of their linemen are taken off for the NFL. My guess is Notre Dame will still be favored over Miami, but that's not going to be a huge spread. And I think they'll probably be a slight favorite against BYU and Provo. But outside of those 2 games, Notre Dame's schedule is weak. So that might be a bigger game for Notre Dame, actually, than it is for BYU. Because, again, as the ecosystem presents itself now, conference championship games are still technically on your schedule. But, of course, Notre Dame is not in a conference. A lot of people believe they should, at some point, bite the bullet and join. They will tell you that there's no need for them to do that because they're Notre Dame. But the Notre Dame-BYU game might be bigger for Notre Dame than it is for BYU. So hear me out. Because if we play this scenario forward, if BYU enters the Notre Dame game undefeated, which I think they will, Utah Tech, Arizona, Colorado State on the road, TCU and Fort Worth, then it's Iowa State at home. So if BYU is 5-0 when Notre Dame comes to Provo, and Notre Dame is undefeated as well, as they should be when they come to Provo, as a result of what is a very soft schedule, at least on paper, for Notre Dame, they might need this win in Provo more than BYU does, because my gut is telling me BYU could lose. Let's call it. Now, we talked about this prior to the Texas Tech game, right? Big 12 championship. What would happen if Tech won that game like 24-23 or kicked a field goal, at the buzzer to win that game? Would the College Football Playoff Committee look at BYU differently because they played who at the time was a top 5 football team right down to the wire? Now, unfortunately for BYU, Texas Tech undressed them again on national television. And so the argument just became a moot point. It was an exercise in futility to even discuss it. But if BYU plays Notre Dame tough, because if we operate off the premise that Notre Dame is a top 5 football team and BYU handles their business, Notre Dame comes into town, and let's say Notre Dame wins, 27-24. Then BYU is at UCF. They do get Arizona State, but that's at home, which does bring us to the Utah game. I do wish this was played at the end of the season. I'm not going to completely beat that dead horse over and over like a lot of people, but with how consequential Utah and BYU could be, and I think will be, can you imagine if it was the last game of the season where it used to be and where it should be, with everything that could be at stake? If it was like late November, it was like November 28th. So BYU's last game of the season is going to be Cincinnati at home. Yawn. And Utah's last game of the season is going to be West Virginia at home. Give me a break. I mean, things will probably be determined by then. But back to the point, I think BYU could lose a close game to Notre Dame and then advance to the Big 12 championship game, and let's say they lose to Tech again. That still might give them a case to potentially crack the top 12. The problem is, as we talked about with Notre Dame, is what the College Football Playoff Committee has told us, is that if you're in the Big 12 and you want to be invited to our party, you have to go win that conference. And if you're Utah, if you're BYU, if you're anybody outside of Texas Tech who appears to be in a class of their own, just like Marcus Freeman said about Notre Dame, I think the bottom line is you have to leave, no doubt. All right, we will catch a quick break. Your 4 o'clock hour today is Tim McMahon from ESPN and Craig Bolerjack, the TV voice of the Jazz. So keep it here on a Wednesday drive on ESPN 700. Night off for the Utah Jazz tonight. Really good win for them last night. It was a fun game. It was as entertaining of a Jazz game, I think, as we've seen all year. It's going to be the San Antonio Spurs and Victor Wembanyama tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the Delta Center. Recently, the Jazz were in Texas for a couple of games against the Mavs and the Spurs. So our next guest had a front row seat to our local pro basketball team. Tim McMahon, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
Howdy, partner. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. So let's start with some Jazz stuff, and then there's a lot of other things I want to get to with you today. And, you saw them kind of against Dallas. That was a weird, back-to-back where both teams like, okay, you're going to hold him out, so I'll hold that player out or whatever. They, lost they lost 4 straight. They went 1-4 on that road trip. But, man, last night they looked really good. And we've seen more growth from Ace Bailey over the past couple of weeks. He had kind of in a vacuum last night, 3 or 4 really, really good moments. Of course, we've gone over the Keontae growth. We're watching now for just like moments because you never know night in and night out if they're going to be front-facing and competitive. But what have you seen as far as these moments that indicate maybe there's some things to like about this Jazz team this year?
Something I don't think that I would be saying at this point of the year is Yusuf Nurkic is a pretty big difference maker for the Jazz.
For sure.
He did not play in either of the Dallas games, but, obviously last night made a huge difference for the triple-double. And I know Jazz fans love this stat, he leads the league in screen assists.
Oh, nice.
And,
oh, yes.
And in all seriousness, talking to people around the Jazz, I think you asked me, like, how specifically Keontae George had improved. So I asked some people about that. And one of the things they brought up is just how much he's benefited with playing with Yusuf Nurkic and just how much he's like a right tackle with the space that he's helped create for Keontae to operate. And, that leads to another question. There are a lot of people, hey, what are the Jazz going to do before the trade deadline? Are they looking to dump all their veterans? That sort of a thing. I'm not saying there's zero chance that they're going to trade Yusuf Nurkic, but what I would tell you is there's real interest in having Nurkic back next year, ideally as a backup.
Huh. Interesting. Help me understand, Tim, because Nurkic he's always been good. He was. Well, but let me land the plane. There were legitimate debates when Denver had Jokic and Nurkic. Like, how are they going to move forward? They obviously made the right call. Then had some really good years in Portland. What went wrong as far as him finding himself, all due respect, playing for a team that's unserious about competing? Because if I'm a GM and I'm watching him this year, I'm like, wait a second, he looks really, really good.
Well, I can tell you that his relationship with Mike Budenholzer last year in Phoenix, I think he said it himself, was non-existent.
Okay.
And, so that things went completely off the rails for him in Phoenix. Let's be honest, though, things went completely off the rails for that entire franchise.
Yeah.
If we want to talk about the Phoenix Suns' problems last year, Nurkic was on the list, but he wasn't near the top of the list. But I do think just that situation, he felt unwanted. I think that impacted his effort, his performance. For whatever reason, that was a terrible fit and really dragged his value down. But I think he has restored his value. I don't think that you're going to have people around the league making a play for him to be a starter. I do think he's restored his value to the point of being perceived as a high quality backup. And again, I think that he's enjoyed playing in Utah. As messy as things are with the extended tank here, guys who play in Utah generally enjoy playing for Will Hardy, for Ryan Smith. The players are treated well in that organization. And, the guy obviously has had a bigger opportunity than anticipated because of Walker Kessler's injury. But he's really taken advantage of it. Again, I think the Jazz probably will get some calls. I don't think there's going to be anything that materializes with Nurk that would be like a no-brainer, got-to-do-it type of deal. And if something doesn't materialize like that, my guess is he'll finish the season in Utah, and they'll try to work out a deal to keep him around next year.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. Based off of the fact that you had a chance to be at those games when the Jazz were in town. Just kind of give us a general feel about where they're at in this process. For the first time, I'm really starting, I think, in 4+ years to really see this start to take shape a little bit. Now, there are plenty of things that still have to fall into place, and we know they're going to try to keep the asset, which, by the way, they should be totally on board with that. It does make for a clunky watch from night to night, but I do feel like we're moving into the space where the unserious nature sometimes about competing might go out the window sooner than most people think. What's the general feel around the organization right now?
I would say the feel and the hope is that next year they're serious about competing. And look, that doesn't mean they're going to be like a top 4 seed in the Western Conference, but there's a real belief that they can at least be competitive, that winning can be the priority, that they can be a play-in type of team. And look, man, if that was the priority this year, I think there's a real chance they would be in the play-in mix in the Western Conference. They've got some good wins. I mean, Minnesota, Cleveland, the back-to-back against the Pistons and Spurs. Last night, I think that might have been the first game they won without Lowry playing, but you can fact-check me on that. But there haven't been many. I think that was the first. But Keontae's emergence, we've talked about it over and over, has been huge because now the Jazz can say, okay, we've got a core in place. That's Lowry, that's Keontae, that's Ace Bailey, who they are very happy with. And again, when I talk to people about Ace Bailey within the Jazz organization, they point me toward the defensive end first, and his willingness to compete, his length, his athleticism, his versatility there. They think his potential to be an elite two-way player is there. And then, talking to people with the Jazz over the few days they were in town, they are optimistic that Walker Kessler will be back in Utah next year. Now, they ultimately will have final say on that because of his restricted free agency nature. What I will tell you, though, is what the Jazz consider to be reasonable market value for Walker and what Walker and his agents at CAA consider to be reasonable market value are vastly different. And I think, the word around the league is the Wizards are preparing to make him a significant offer. So we'll see how things play out there.
Just to follow up, I mean, what, generally speaking, what sort of, because the Jazz danced this dance with Gordon Hayward and said, go bet on yourself. And he got a max offer deal from Charlotte, and they matched it. So if they allow Walker to go kind of do the same thing, what type of offer out there that he receives, you think, basically scares the Jazz away?
I don't know. What I can tell you is I think the Jazz are very comfortable with something around $25 million a year. How much more than that would be a walk-away point? I don't know. Walker and his agents are hoping to find out.
Yeah, for sure. And good for him. I mean, bummed out that he's going to miss the season. But, I was talking about this earlier. I don't know that we need to see anything else from him to indicate that he at least has a ton of potential to be a very good starting center in the NBA for a long time. As far as players, because I'm not going to ask you about Keontae every week because you're going to stop coming on the show. There's nothing else to talk about with him.
I like talking about Keontae. Well, he's fun to watch, man. Hey, a guy had 43 in a win last night.
Well, and also, Tim, he hit 4 or 5 shots over Gobert that were like next level skill checks. I mean, every time I hone in on him, man, like I'm more and more impressed. Now, we'll ignore the defensive side of the basketball because no one on this team guards. But as far as some of the other youngsters, Taylor, of course, is still essentially a rookie with games played because of the injury. And then we've seen some moments from Cody here or there, but does it feel like they've done the calculation? We saw a great Sensabaugh game not too long ago. I think I was expecting maybe a little bit more from Filipowski, but generally speaking, do you think they've landed on the core of this group that they want to move forward with?
The guys that I mentioned are considered core pieces, and I don't think they've ruled out anybody else, but they certainly aren't like saying, hey, we've got to make sure we get Cody Williams locked in long-term, or, Hendricks, or, the Filipowski. The problem with Filipowski is he's the ultimate tweener. He cannot play center in the NBA and have any hope of having a decent defense. I mean, if you want to talk about the Jazz's defensive issues, the fact he plays a lot of minutes at the 5 is on that list for sure. but he's not really a power forward either. So I don't, he might end up being one of these guys who ends up being really good for Fenerbahce or Real Madrid or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But again, they haven't ruled any of these guys out. Isaiah Collier's on that list. Basically, all their young guys. I think of that group of guys, I think they're most optimistic about Sensabaugh's future because there is a clearly defined role that you see him filling, and that's that bench bucket getter. Will calls him the crock pot. Not the microwave. He's a little bit slower burning than that, but once he gets hot, once that orange light's on, it's on.
Love it. Yeah, he's in better shape now too, which of course was a necessity when he entered the league. Last Jazz thing, you referenced the Nurkic stuff, and I think you've told us, and I've heard from other people that, and you just referenced the Lowry stuff. Unless they're blown away, it's not happening. If there is a deal that involves the Jazz prior to the deadline here in just a couple weeks, what would it be and why?
I mean, somebody want to give you like a second-round pick for Kyle Anderson or something like that. I don't think there's going to be anything that is going to be but put it this way, I'll be surprised if the Jazz make a move that would crack the NBA headline stack on ESPN.com. And I think they expand that to like 10 slots in trade deadline time. They could be part of facilitating something else, but I don't think they're going to do anything that's going to drastically alter the roster or the franchises in the near future at the deadline.
Tough news for Jimmy Butler, who's going to turn 37 next year. And, the Golden State Warriors had actually won 4 straight and were 12-4 over the prior 16. I don't know that I would have, or at any point all year, quite frankly, I'm not sure if I would have considered them on the level of teams that can win the whole thing. But when you have Steph Curry, best foot forward, how do they proceed here? And what does the Jonathan Kuminga trade demand look like now?
I tell you what, how about Mike Dunleavy's
response
when somebody asked him about the trade demand? If you're going to make a demand, there has to be demand on the market.
Yep.
Oof, that stung. But they're basically in a situation where, Kuminga has to play. He was rotting at the end of the bench. I think it was 16 games that went by with DNP CDs for him, and they really don't have any choice. He has to play. And maybe that helps create a market, as a showcase period of sorts. The problem is they don't, if they're taking back salary, they want to be a real player. And I don't see a lot of people looking to offer a real player for Kuminga right now. So I don't know, man, how much longer can they keep kicking the can down the road with him? If he's not traded by the deadline, do you pick up that team option and try it again next year? I don't know, man. He's already essentially an expiring contract. Dallas has some level of interest. It probably would have to be tied into an AD deal with expiring is going to Golden State. But the reason they've got interest in Kuminga is, okay, take a flyer on the guy for the rest of the season. If it works out, cool. If not, it's an expiring salary, and you can kind of fix your financial picture a little bit. I don't know, man. At some point, it's been way too much of a saga, and there needs to be some finality at some point. I'm just not sure if that's going to be February 5th.
When it comes to the reports about, the relationship between Kuminga and Kerr, if you're benched, you're not going to be thrilled with your coach. But does it go deeper than that? You hear some real reports that it isn't just the DNPs, and maybe it's more than, as to why that relationship is so icy. Do you have any insight there?
I don't think it's complicated. I think if Steve Kerr doesn't believe in Jonathan Kuminga, and Jonathan Kuminga thinks Steve Kerr is stifling his career. I don't necessarily know that it's a personal beef as much as professionally they are at odds. Kerr doesn't think Kuminga is a winning player, and Kuminga thinks Kerr is keeping him from fulfilling his potential. So yeah, that's a problem.
So when it comes to teams that you think will be active come trade deadline time, we all know what the rumors are out there and what the names are. Is there anything you're hearing about something that could actually be consummated that changes the dynamic of the league?
Honestly, the thing that I'm most focused on is there a home for Anthony Davis and is there a home for John Morant? I don't know that there's a team that's willing to trade for John Morant at this point. I thought Toronto, the reporting out of there is no. I thought maybe Milwaukee, I've heard that's a no as well. Miami, no. That they've certainly made that clear. There's always the Sacramento Kings. I don't know. And if Ja is not traded, you've got a real messy situation there in Memphis. I don't think it's as messy in Dallas, but it's clear like Anthony Davis is not part of this franchise's future. The Mavericks are just at a point now, with him hurt again, where I think February 5th they're going to have to decide if whatever is on the table is worth just kind of turning the page, or do you try again in the summer, maybe even leading up to next year's deadline, hoping to squeeze a little bit more value. But the thing is, you can't say we gave up Luka to get this guy. We've got to get more value because the Luka trade's a sunk cost. So we'll see what happens on both of those fronts.
You wrote recently about Dillon Brooks, and I wanted to kind of dig in here a little bit because every time I watch Phoenix play, I'm like, they're a pain in the ass. Like, I don't think they're going to win anything this year, but if I'm Denver or OKC or San Antonio, I would rather not play them and try to beat them 4 times in 7 tries, even though I think all those teams would. They're from my estimation, they might be the biggest, most pleasant surprise as it comes to the way they've performed after getting rid of some legitimately superstar players, namely Durant and Beal. But it's very easy to dislike Dillon Brooks. He makes it very, very easy. But also, I was raised on teams that had Anthony Mason and Charles Oakley and guys that were easy to hate but were necessary for the success of the organization. Tell me what you kind of learned throughout this process and the value that he has.
Paid the man $86 million over 4 years, but they believed that Dillon Brooks coming in with Fred VanVleet and Ime Udoka would give that franchise some toughness, some work ethic. I think the most misunderstood thing about Dillon Brooks is he does have a very unique way of being a professional, but there is professionalism there, and that is in work ethic. That is in effort. Now there's antics, obviously. There's technical fouls galore, but if you're on Dillon Brooks' team and you're not working, he's going to let you know about it. If you're on Dillon Brooks' team, I agree with you. The Suns are probably them or the Raptors, but certainly the West had the most pleasant surprise in the Raptors, but certainly the West had the most pleasant surprise in the conference. It's funny, when Memphis made that trade of Desmond Bane and they got all those picks back, they thought the most valuable pick they got back was Phoenix's this year. And it's like this, multi-swap type of situation. It turns out they're probably not going to get that pick because it's not going to be the best pick of the bunch. And that's in large part because Dillon Brooks, the dude that they dumped and kind of shamed on the way out the door, is making such an impact to the Suns. But, he's done it relatively efficiently, and a lot of that's, his mid-range game. And the guy works on it. I don't know that his numbers at the end of the year are going to be as good as his numbers are right now. But I do know he's going to be one of the best wing defenders in the league, and, he's going to bring all the intangible stuff.
All right. Actually, real quick, I heard reports that the Rockets did not want to include him in the deal. It is what you got. You go get Kevin Durant, make the trade. But did Houston want to hold on to Dillon Brooks?
Absolutely. No question. Yeah, no. And I'll tell you this. If Dillon Brooks hits free agency or is available via trade, which history has made clear is not, the Rockets would love to have Dillon Brooks back. I mean, like every time they see him, the GM, the coaching staff, the players, the ownership, like it's hugs and smiles. Like they love Dillon Brooks in Houston. No question about that.
Any chance the Giannis stuff goes down? Any chance he goes to them and says that's enough? Like they're not good. They're not doing anything this year. Any chance that they move him?
There's always a chance.
Yeah.
I mean, and listen, and that's something that people are going to keep their ears open and eyes open about until the deadline passes. I know he's shot it down. I know the Bucks are saying no way. They're trying to, upgrade the roster. I think you ask things that might happen. Like I could definitely see Zach LaVine landing in Milwaukee, kind of, desperate, taking on desperate type of situation there. But you're right, they're not good. There's no hope of them morphing into a contender all of a sudden. So how not good do they need to be for Giannis to finally decide that he's going to put his foot down and ask out and be, quote unquote, the bad guy? I couldn't tell you that, but it's absolutely, that's one of the biggest things people around the league will keep their eye on for sure.
Before I say you lose, the Pistons have been awesome. Our old buddy Dennis Lindsay and Trajan Langdon have done an excellent job, and they're for real. But Boston's without Tatum. I think they've played really well. You referenced the Raptors. If Philly could ever get all the players on the floor for an extended time, maybe they would be a player. But this conference, the Eastern Conference, coming into the season, felt like it was wide open. And somewhere Tom Thibodeau is counting his $30 million and smiling, because every time I watch the Knicks, I have two takeaways. They don't guard and they hate each other. The other day, the Mavs were beating them by like 35. And they made a little bit of a run, but they've lost 4 straight. They're 2-8 in their last 10. What is going on there as far as what your understanding is? And is that a team that needs to make a move to get back to, being a player in the East?
Yeah, they need to make a move. James Dolan needs to sell the franchise. That's a great move for them to make.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, dude. There's they've overcome the cultural rot over the last few years. And then you get to the conference finals for the first time in however long and decide that the coach isn't good enough. You need to get rid of him. That was ridiculous. And right now, there's all kinds of finger pointing. They're like scapegoating Cat. Okay, sure. Maybe they move Cat. I don't think that's solving all their problems. The only teams that have been as bad as them defensively during this 2-9 stretch that they're in are, I think, the Jazz, the Wizards, and the Nets. Or maybe the Pelicans, whatever, the worst teams in the league. They're playing at a league worst level over, a double-figure game stretch here. And basically, if you play hard, the Knicks are in trouble right now because they're not playing with any kind of effort. They look like a team that's rolled over on their new head coach halfway through a season. They're the biggest embarrassment in the league because they're a franchise that came in with a finals or bust mission, and midway through the season, things have gone completely off the rails.
Maybe they should reconsider not hanging the NBA Cup banner at the Garden. Maybe we need to get that up there.
Yeah, no, it's the curse of the ribbon for sure. Put a ribbon up there, baby.
Tim, you're the man. Thanks for the time. Safe travels. Be well, okay?
Hey, you didn't even ask me about Keontae George. I went and asked people with the Jazz, and I gave you a little bit on Nurk. The other thing I was told was that they're really focused on his shot discipline, which is different than shot selection. Will showed him a bunch of tape of Kyrie Irving, not all the ball handling, not all the crazy layup package, but just how consistent he is with his shot mechanics going straight up on his jumper. And you don't see Keontae doing a bunch of leaning and fleet flailing and all that kind of stuff. And he's become a big-time scorer this year. But shot discipline, baby. How about that?
Love it, Tim. You always leave us with a great tidbit, so I appreciate it. But I feel like I've taken up too much of your time. If you want to keep chatting, I do this for 4 hours, right?
I'll talk to you next week.
All right, there he is. Tim McMahon, Ban McMahon over at ESPN. I always appreciate Tim's time. Jazz are off tonight, and then they're back in action against the Spurs tomorrow. All right, text to win a 4-pack of tickets to an advanced screening of Shelter, starring Jason Statham, on Tuesday, January the 27th at Megaplex Valley Fair Mall. More details at ESPN700sports.com. Text Shelter right now to 877-353-0700. All right, we'll catch a quick break. TV voice of the Jazz, Craig Bolerjack, is our guest. Coming up next on ESPN 700. I have a Def Leppard joke. I don't have I shared with you my joke? Have you heard it before?
Yeah.
All right, we'll leave it off air for today.
Bowler's singing in the background, by the way.
Bowler is my guy. Okay, let's be very clear that our next guest, Craig Bowlerjack, is my guy. What's up, Bowler? How are you, bud?
Vince, I'm good. Tough road trip, but last night I'll take one of those once in a while. Right? It was fun. Crowd loved it. It was a lot of energy in the building.
No, last night was awesome. Last night was maybe the best win of the season, and. Bowler, we are starting to see. So I've simply just changed my paradigm. When I'm watching this team, I'm watching for moments. I'm just watching for growth. I'm watching for proof that this thing is actually headed in the right direction. Now, it's a tough time for Jazz fans because the necessity to keep the asset, and I want to be clear, I view it as a necessity, mandates that at times they're not going to be front-facing about trying to compete. Okay, we get it. We can put that aside. So now as you watch, you're just looking for growth. You're looking for moments, and we just will start again with Keontae, who last night, Craig, hit 4 or 5 really difficult shots over the best shot blocker of this generation, and that's Rudy Gobert. He talked a lot post-game about the arc on his shot and how he was shooting it a little bit flatter last year. And shot discipline is what he's been working on. And every time I hone in on him, I am more impressed about what I perceive to be a very legitimate individual isolation offensive weapon the Jazz have now that they did not have a year ago.
Totally agree. It's been one of the most incredible transformations I've witnessed in my career in a one-year period of time. Spence, a young man who had to face, I think, a reality, face some tough decisions that were handed out to him by Jazz management. I think also by his head coach, Will Hardy, which they forged a very deep and sometimes intense relationship. And the transformation is upon us. And give Keontae a ton of credit and the coaching staff who, he's willing to be coached. And a lot of players aren't at that level when you're 3 years in. But that's about the time, too, Spence, as you know. The Jazz have to make some tough decisions. And they get a look and they say, look, you want it? Go get it. And if you're not, then they have to move on. And I think Keontae heard those words and decided to really dive into himself mentally, physically, and this is the outcome. I was waiting the first – Big T said an interesting point last night, 10, 12, 15 games, okay. We kind of said, okay, we see you, Keontae, but now we see you. The second half of the season is upon us. His 17th career, 30-point game. He's had some incredible nights on the floor, and you're right about the tough shot. It seems to me that he feeds off, and this is a good thing, he feeds off the moment. And a lot of players shy and back away from it because they don't want to be put in that tough situation, win or lose. And you're going to lose, you're going to lose games because you missed a shot, but you're going to win some. But you also make the impact throughout the game, which Keontae is beginning to do more on a nightly basis. I think, Spence, consistency would be the best word when you start to grade out, judge Keontae George. And last night was, if not his best game, one of his best games, and he was able to drop, the teardrop over Gobert. I mean, he had a couple of great shots high off the window. Like you said, the three from the corner, not once but twice. And the way that he is physical, he is not backing down, straight line drives, which equated into a lot of trips to the free throw line. And the fourth level has made him a legitimate, I think, conversational piece in the All-Star talk. And whether the coaches pick him or however it works out, but I'd say he's on the cusp, and he's proven that he may belong there. Yeah.
So I was looking at some Nurkic splits earlier today. Because and you and I have talked about this over the years, are we a NBA market or are we a Jazz market? And I think a lot of people that, listen to sports talk radio just watch the Jazz. And so, when it comes to Yusuf Nurkic, his career path has been really interesting. The Denver Nuggets at one point had a legitimate debate about, do we keep Yusuf Nurkic or Nikola Jokic? Now, I think it's safe to say they made the right call. But as they moved Nurkic on to Portland, I mean, he had a year where he was 18-10. We're talking, 15-11. This is a player who over the course of 4, 5, 6, 7 years did average, around, 14-10 and blocked some shots at a high level. Has always shot a high level from the floor because he gets a lot of dunks and layups. He's expanded his game over the past few years to include the three-point shot. But no part of me thought we would be sitting here talking about Yusuf Nurkic being a very legitimate difference maker for this Jazz team. Yeah. And Will does a really good job of being intentional to make sure that, and it's the Keontae Nurkic, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's the Keontae Nurkic pick and roll that has become so dangerous because he has always been an elite screen setter because he is a massive, massive dude. I don't know that he's part of the future, but at least part, for now in a vacuum in the present, he's been a pro, and I just wonder what your perspective has been.
Yeah, it's hard not to like him, Spence. On the road, get to know him a little more. Very flashy dresser. He kind of took the place of Jordan Clarkson in that runway category with suits when he doesn't play. But he has become a big part of this team, both in the locker room and on the floor. And that would not have happened if Walker Kessler did not re-injure that shoulder and have the season-ending surgery. I don't think Will expected to play him, obviously, this much, but look what he's been able to give him, and look what he's been able to do for the Jazz. Look, I think he's embraced the role, the city. It's always a conversation, right, about whether or not Utah is a destination point. But I think Nurk is excited to kind of restart a career after the, let's just say, hit a wall in Phoenix and not much in Washington last year. I think he's thankful for the opportunity. And you're right about the size. I mean, when you get alongside him, you realize the size and the length and the width of this man. 7-footer, 290. The basketball is like an orange in his hand. And when he spreads out to really put a screen down, I mean, you see it and you give, there's more floor space. Marketing, when healthy, takes advantage of that as well, Spence. And it becomes a real dangerous situation for defenders to try to close that space. But, man, last night Nurk was on. He's told myself and Big T multiple times he doesn't search out triple-doubles. He doesn't look at box scores. He just goes out and plays. And last night it came to him, and look how long the Jazz had to wait for JC. It was Boozer right in the regular season, I believe, to have a triple-double, and then JC gets one on New Year's Day of 2025, and then we get the Jazz, score another one last night, and the second of his career, of Nurkic's career last night. But it was fun to watch, and he's a talent. And you're right, whether he's a part of the future, can he be satisfied coming off the bench and being a really dominant presence? We don't know what will happen this summer. But, man, I tell you, he's making a case to be a part of this franchise for the next few years.
Starting to see some growth from Ace. Continue to discuss playing the long game with him because he simply is just so young. It's easy to forget. But he put Dante DiVincenzo into the third row last night with just a massive dunk. Great call by you. Hammer time, by the way. There was an excellent backdoor. Yeah, it was awesome. Excellent backdoor cut where Nurk found him and he had a good dunk. But we're seeing catch and shoot threes. We're seeing off the bounce pull up jumpers with both right and left, which is a skill that sounds simplistic, but it's not for a player that's 6'9", 6'10". So we'll, of course, need time to tell us what he is going to be when it's fully baked. But we are starting to see a little growth, and I think that's a testament to this head coach who continues to be wildly impressive, Will Hardy.
Yeah, Will won his 100th career game last night, and it's been a long time coming. Fourth year and win number 100. I think he'll remember this one because it was special. You make a great point on Ace. We've been kind of waiting. He had the illness, and he had the hip flexor issue. He said that injury had a mind of its own. It kept coming and going, but he has played the last week and a half at a very high level since his return. Last night, I think Spence, again, just going off a former NBA player and what Big T has to say is that sooner or later you have to play this game without really thinking, and you can overthink it. You just react to the moment. And I think last night we got a taste of really what this Jazz team can become with some more additions, obviously. But Ace is one of those growth moments where I think he's probably said to himself, man, I can play. I can play at this level, and I can play against the big dogs. I mean, look who was on the floor last night. Anthony Edwards, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. And, you know, he didn't shy away from it, and he attacked. And he's more confident with his shot. He has a mid-range game as well. And he is physical, and he is long. He can play the defensive side, which, you know, the Jazz are excited. I think maybe more excited about at the moment because that's one of the weakest links to making them a legitimate team in the NBA. But, man, last night I thought it was just another moment where if you watch the game and if Jazz Nation, whether you're home or at the arena last night, I think you got a taste, just another peek inside what could be happening and what could happen here over the next year or two, and adding that one more piece or two, and then really being aggressive market in the free agent market, putting a couple of people around all these young players and making some things really happen.
You know, when it comes to a guy that's built the way Ace is built, okay, like historically speaking, you know, speaking from a perspective of, you know, scouting the game and learning from great basketball minds and watching so many young players enter pro basketball that have that build, that are big and long. This is going to sound very reductive and very simplistic, but the thing that gives me the most confidence, okay, is that the kid plays his tail off. And here's why. If you go over the history of pro basketball, the biggest busts in the history of the NBA, the majority of them are big dudes. The majority of them are really tall, long players. And the reason why they haven't lasted, I always remember like draft night prior to 2009, ESPN had Jim Calhoun on their coverage. And Jim Calhoun was the head coach of UConn. And Hasheem Thabeet was coming out of college, and he had played for Jim. And they asked him on the coverage, what do you think about Hasheem Thabeet's NBA future? And he said, well, the problem is he doesn't like basketball. And I'm like, well, then he's screwed. He's not going to like his college coach said he doesn't like playing. And sure enough, Hasheem Thabeet lasted like 2 years. Kwame Brown, Sam Bowie, Darko Milicic, Dragan Bender, Greg Oden, Michael Olowokandi, James Wise, and Marvin Bagley. Like these are all players between 6'9" and 7'2" that didn't learn how to play hard because they were bigger and more skilled than everybody else growing up. And then when you get into the NBA, it will tell you the truth about who you are, because if you do not play hard, you do not last. So my favorite thing about Ace is simply the effort factor, because he's built with a complete skill set. If he puts in the work, he has a chance to be really special.
No, it's I tell you, Spence, that comment about bigs and draft picks and being the number 1 through 3. I mean, if you go down the history of just the draft, just because you shine in a particular system or in college or in high school. Now, look, there's some exceptions, obviously, and one is LeBron coming right out of high school. We had C.J. Miles on the other night in San Antonio, came right out of high school, Skyline High School, still had a nice NBA career, but didn't wow the NBA. But, you have to love this game and play it nearly 24 hours in your sleep as well. Film sessions, which people never see, are constant. You have to be the junkie. You have to look at games, not only the ones you played, but other teams that are playing that you will see down the road to look for tendencies. You have to build a great connection with your coach. Your position coach, your head coach. You have to understand. You have to be coachable. You can't take things personal. And in the world we live in today, Spence, I mean, let's be honest. Social media can tear you apart. AAU basketball can give you a false sense of who you are and what you think you deserve, and then you are torn down quickly when you hit the big time, the NBA. And that's where a lot of players can't make that adjustment. From my chair, I mean, I believe that wholeheartedly. I've seen guys with talent but yet don't want to work at it. I mean, I remember Greg Ostertag one time told me, he wishes he could have restarted or replayed his career. Because when you're a 7-footer, Spence, most of the times coaches come to you and say, hey, you got to play. You got to play for me because you're big. But you know what? Do you love the game? Do you love it? I think Tag learned to love it, and he loved Jerry Sloan because of maybe the way they had the up and down relationships. But man, he did finally, I think, find some peace in himself about, man, I wish I could go back and do it because I didn't work hard enough. And there's a lot of players that fit that category. But just because you're a 7-footer doesn't mean you love the game. It's because basically you've been hey, come along for the ride. I need you. But, man, you have to love it to play it, and especially make it a 15-year, 17, 18-year career, which a lot of players are doing. Mike Conley, for one, who still loves the game. He told me last night he loves to play. He's undersized, but he's still playing the game. But a lot of players get the draft, get the money. But you know what? Like you just said, that list is a great one to refer to because they were not long for the NBA. They were not.
Yeah, and the tag stuff, because people forget, man, Greg, over the first couple of seasons, it was like, okay, we actually have a center that can at least provide a little pushback. I mean, he was never going to be an all-star, but he was a good rim protector. He could board, and he was developing a decent little post game. The thing with Greg Bowler, and you've seen this over and over, just so many players get paid and then they retire the day they sign the contract. They're just like, I did it. I'm done. Yeah. I've got 2 commas in my bank account forever. My kids are taken care of. And, part of me wonders what Greg would have been able to do if he simply was motivated by something outside of getting that check, because he just became a different player after he got paid.
Yeah. It happens a lot. We see it yearly. The second contract's the big one. You come in as a rookie, you get the rookie scale, and it's still pretty impressive. It's meaty, but not the one you're going to sign on the second go around. And that's where the real test is. Again, from my perspective, Spence, is if you get paid, okay, now, are you going to come out and bust your tail? Are you going to just lay back and play 67? You're going to come out and try to play 80? You're going to play 76? How tough are those injuries? I think Jazz fans got incredibly spoiled in that generation. I know people say don't go back there, but look, there was a time when there was pride about 82. There was pride about 80, and there was pride about playing hurt. But yet again, the league has become where your investment is so intensely deep with money involved here, Spence, of 45 million per year or 200+ million for 4 or 5, that you almost hesitate to even, it's like having a Lamborghini but not driving it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where the league has kind of gotten, and can they reel themselves back in, knowing that these guys are incredibly highly talented players, but sometimes afraid to actually put them on the floor, because if they're injured, then you lose the investment. But injury is part of the game, and depth is another part of this game. Great teams have depth, and it's that old cliche, next man up. But to win a title, you have to have some luck, and you have to have depth, and you have to play defense for sure. And the three-point game, as you know, is a vital part of the NBA now. So, we're at an interesting, I don't know, not crossroads, but an interesting time of what ownership's going to do. How far can you go in the contracts? How much, sponsorship money can you get, advertising dollars, and television revenue? But if you make that second contract, Spence, most guys are going to make a pretty good chunk of change.
Yeah, and that's why something other than that has to motivate you, and it's not just a basketball trait. You see people across the landscape of business and commerce build up a company, and suddenly there's an IPO. You make tens of millions of dollars, and if you're not motivated to do other things in life, you'd be surprised at how miserable you are if you just have money with no motivation. I find it to be a really fascinating, human. I know a lot of very miserable rich people, Bowler, is what I'm saying. You got to find something else to keep you going, You
do. You cannot let that define you. I think is the point. And players talk about that all the time. CJ made a comment the other night again, you can become very lackadaisical and only relate to yourself as a basketball player, but you have to find something outside that to define who you are, your family, investments, like you said. Whether you love or dislike LeBron, you have to respect the passion that he's had for this game for 20-plus years. I mean, burnout happens. And the body wears down, and you don't want to go to practice. You don't want to have to do the extra lifting. and all the above. But, you have to respect the fact he continues to respect the game, and he does still play at a high level. How long that happens, who knows? Only Father Time. But he's pushed him away pretty good, and very few players still have the love for the game. I think Carl and John would be in that category, and that's something that you see other players who've rolled through the Jazz organization that just maybe weren't as passionate, and it kind of tells you on the length of the career they had. If they hit 10, they probably felt like they were lucky, and you're right, the bank account looks pretty sweet after that.
If there is a deal that is made prior to the February 6th trade deadline, Bowler, what's your gut tell you? At this point, I'm just not like, if I'm a general manager, and I keep talking about the Celtics. First of all, we know that the Jazz and the Celtics have a lot of familiarity with each other and a good relationship. Boston, without Jason Tatum, has been really good, but they need a big. And if I'm watching the Jazz, I'm calling Austin and Danny and saying, what do you want for Nurkic? So like that is what my gut tells me might happen. But if something happens prior to February 6th, what do you think it is?
Well, you make a great point there. The first piece, fell with Trae Young's trade, and boy, I'll be honest, not much in return, right? I think it was more or less help us out, we'll help you, and take his contract, which they did. Not sure how active the NBA is going to be. I'm not sure how active the Jazz are going to be. One thing that's always been Utah's MO is don't give away pieces just for the sake of moving them. They'll have to have something, I would say, fairly significant, Spence, in return. Nurk just seems like a really good piece. It'd be tough to see him go. But again, I'm not in that room, and I don't know. I'm not sure how aggressive the NBA is going to be. With Jimmy Butler's injury, the scuttlebutt today is maybe the movement on Anthony Davis becomes more vital for Golden State, right, to satisfy Steph in the window of opportunity. But, I'm not sure how aggressive the deadline's going to be. You get a feel yourself? I mean, I'm not real sure right now.
Yeah, I mean, most of the pieces that are floated out there are distressed assets. Like, I don't want to be in the Ja Morant business. I just don't. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, absolutely. But at this point, he's got to show that he takes his craft seriously for me to invest in him because of how expensive the deal is. And look, I love Anthony Davis as a player. That dude just cannot stay on the floor. I'm not paying for that either. The Zion Williamson stuff is a little bit intriguing only because of this. There are, if you go look at Zion Williamson's basketball reference page throughout the course of his career, there are about 20 to 25 game sample sizes that when he's healthy, he's as good as anybody. And I mean anybody, Craig. But that's another issue. Like, does he want to be a pro? There's all this Zion stuff off the floor where he doesn't appear to stay in shape. He has a proclivity for not being able to control himself in certain areas of life. I will leave it there. Gordy always has this saying, there's a reason that these guys are on the trade block. It's not just no team wants to trade an awesome player who doesn't cause issues. There just isn't a name out there. And Atlanta moves on from Trae Young, in my opinion, because there's another move down the road for them. But if I'm the Jazz, I don't want to be in the Trae Young business. I don't want to be in the Zion Williamson business or the Ja Morant business or even the Anthony Davis business. It only takes one GM to believe that you're one move away from, getting over the top. And if you're the East, right, the Knicks have to do something because the East is open and they're just awful. They're imploding right now. But from a league-wide standpoint, I was going to ask you about the Cavs because they look not near the team that we've seen over the past couple of years. I just haven't heard outside of one, okay? Obviously, if Giannis becomes available, you trade for Giannis, okay? But he's like the only name that I've heard that actually moves the needle for me.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm not sure he really wants to depart Milwaukee. He's kind of a lifer kind of mentality, which you have to respect as well. For Cleveland, when we were there, some of the people I talked to felt like they're concerned the window had already closed, that the window was open and then closed after last year, and kind of playing like it a little bit. Spence, I'm not sure what Donovan, he's still out there busting tail. Mobley, I'm not real sure the chemistry is both in the locker room, which is obviously uber important, and then how they translate it on the floor. They may be looking for a deal, but who knows, except down to the wire. When someone is like pressed to make that decision, will they say we'll pass? I'm with you on AD, terrific player when healthy, but you just can't really ever pencil him in. And you're right about Zion. Does he love the game? Can he keep the weight off? And man, you're right. The sample size that I've watched him on a few nights during my career, you just are in a wow moment. But his inconsistencies of who he is and what he wants to be is very much in question. And I think that's the other thing too, Spence. And I know you got to go, but the bottom line: the younger you draft players, you still don't get a real sense of who they are, and the maturation process has to go. So if you develop them, my fear is, well, they may leave. And so the development process in those first 3 years under the rookie contract, you do all the legwork, and then they jump and go someplace else, or you decide that they haven't quite reached the potential and you trade them, and then they find their game or who they are mentally and physically. So I tell you, general managers in this league, you've got to be a psychiatrist, a psychologist. You've got to work very close with your training staff to know the body, who's growing, who's building, who's not. And, man, there's a lot of different little teeny singularities in all this, Spence, that makes up a player. And you got to be on top of it, even more so now. And it's probably going to become that way even more as this league continues to grow.
Well, Buller, I appreciate the time. It's a little homestand, so I know you're going to spend some time at home. Enjoy that before hitting the road next month.
Yeah.
Good to be home, I would imagine, yeah?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, 10 days. Then we got Toronto and end up in Orlando and Miami. That's about the time that the trade window closes down. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. And then before you know it, man, we're at the All-Star break. So don't know if Markkanen or Keontae will be in L.A., but both have had their moments this year. And, again, I think this whole conversation is about peeking into the window of what can be. And I think we got a really good taste of it last night.
I agree. Craig, thanks for the time. Fun to see the growth. Be well, okay?
All right, you too, Spence. Thanks.
Craig Bolerjack, TV voice of the Utah Jazz, stops by today courtesy of our friends at Advanced Window Products with a special right now of $2,500 off. When you buy 10 windows or more, if you come home from work and your house is cold, even if the heat is up, you probably need new windows. Same deal in the summer if it's way too hot in your house and you got the AC on, you're hemorrhaging money, first of all. You probably need new windows. So Advanced Window Products, local Salt Lake company, of course, operated by the mayor of Sac Lake City, Nate Orchard, and obviously Jake Weber's buddy, good friends of the show. Getting Utah homeowners the most energy-efficient windows around. Call Advanced Window Products. Get on the schedule to lock in the savings at 801-850-9100 or visit advancedwindows.com. Don't miss out on $2,500 off when you buy 10 windows or more. Give Jake and the mayor a call today at 801-850-9100. You will not regret it. Advanced Window Products, building, installing, and guaranteeing the best windows in Utah. All right, 3 hours down, 1 hour to go. The final hour of the program on a Wednesday afternoon comes your way next on ESPN 700. All right, here we go. Drive at 5 time, Wednesday afternoon style. Congratulations, halfway through that work week and one day closer to the weekend. Happy Wednesday to you. Happy Big 12 schedule release day for you. We have Utah's football schedule, we have BYU's football schedule, and we have the schedule of the entire conference. The Big 12 championship game is going to be moved to a Friday night. A lot of conversation about schedule adjustments in the world of college football. So that's one adjustment that the Big 12 has made. Of course, for BYU, the big announcement with their schedule is the addition of Notre Dame. Notre Dame will be rolling into Provo coming up. Notre Dame, by all accounts, a national championship contender. That game is going to be October the 17th. And I think if you are either BYU or Utah, as we've discussed all day today, you're looking at this schedule release and you're thinking to yourself, okay, we've got a shot here. Now, for Utah, they avoid both Texas Tech and they also avoid Arizona State. And if we look at some of the projections coming up for this upcoming college football season, Texas Tech will be the favorite, is the favorite now to win the Big 12. And Arizona State, even though they're losing some pieces, namely Sam Leavitt, will be a team under Kenny Dillingham that outside of Texas Tech has got a shot to have a say with this thing. So if you're Utah football, you avoid two of the conference championship contenders. And if you're BYU football, you avoid Texas Tech as well. Now, it looks like BYU will have Arizona State at home this year, so that's a good thing. That's going to be on Halloween night down in Provo. But if we kind of analyze this through the lens of what either Utah or BYU has to do to qualify for the Big 12 championship, and unfortunately, if we're honest here, the College Football Playoff Committee has basically told us, and truly pretty early on, I mean, there were some crumbs out there that they were kind of leaving for BYU and Utah fans to consider as far as inclusion to the College Football Playoff, even if you don't win the Big 12 championship. And it really is impossible to analyze any of this stuff in January. But there's a chance that BYU Utah played here in Salt Lake next year. By the way, it's November the 7th. Unfortunately, it will never be the final game of the season again. I don't think so. Now, what the Big 12 has said is they want BYU and Utah to kind of stand on its own. They don't want it to compete with Michigan, Ohio State. Some irony in that comment now. Or some of the other bigger rivalry games that are played later on in the season. But if we just do the exercise, okay? So for BYU, they open up against Utah Tech, and then they have Arizona in Provo. Now, Arizona gets Noah Fafita back. There are a lot of teams in the Big 12 that are going to be replacing their quarterbacks. Arizona's not one of them. They won their final 5 regular season games last year before losing in the bowl game to SMU. But BYU will be a massive favorite in that game, would be my guess. And obviously the Tech game, that's a throwaway. Thanks for coming. Here's your check. Take care. Then it's at Colorado State, all right? They do go to Fort Worth, BYU does, and TCU is a preseason kind of top 25-ish team, according to a bunch of projections, but they're replacing their quarterback as Josh Hoover is going to go play at Indiana now. They get Iowa State at home. Iowa State is kind of an unknown. They lost their coaching staff, and for Utah fans that think that a bunch of players exited to play for Kyle, well, Iowa State lost 19 players to Penn State. Matt Campbell took his, and basically when you look at it, like the 19 best players on that roster. So it's hard to know what Iowa State's going to be. And then you get Notre Dame, okay? And so if Notre Dame lives up to the billing, and we talked about this earlier, Notre Dame's schedule, for the most part next year, is a little bit of a joke. Notre Dame's schedule next year will, in my opinion, allow them to enter the BYU game undefeated and probably ranked in the top 5. They could be a preseason top 5 team. So Notre Dame's schedule prior to BYU is Wisconsin at home. I mean, Wisconsin's a solid program, but it's Wisconsin. That's actually in Green Bay. That's a neutral field game, my bad. Then they get Rice at home. They'll run Rice. Michigan State hasn't been good for years. Then they're at Purdue, and they're at North Carolina. Notre Dame will be undefeated leading into the BYU game. My guess is BYU will be undefeated leading into that game. And if BYU starts the year, let's say 11 through 13, which is where most of the projections have them now, coming up October 17th in Provo, we could have a college game day situation. We could have 2 top 10 teams going head-to-head. In fact, I think that's what we're going to have. But even if BYU loses that game to Notre Dame is going to be favored probably in every game they play. They get Miami at home. Miami just played for a national championship. But my guess is Notre Dame will be a slight favorite, even though it's in Provo. But BYU could lose that game, and as long as they don't get boat raced like they did against Tech twice, I don't think it'll be a very damning thing on their resume. So then it's at UCF for Brigham Young. They get Arizona State, as I said, at home, which is a good thing for them. And then that sets up the matchup against Utah. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My guess is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, my guess is BYU enters the Utah game at 7-1. That's my guess. And the one would be the game against Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is stacked. They're a national championship contender. And on Utah's side of things, they open up September 3rd against Idaho here in Salt Lake. And then it's Arkansas. Now, we talked to a college football analyst earlier, Quinn McLean. I don't know a grip about Arkansas. They didn't win a conference game last year. They were probably the worst team in the SEC. Now, as Indiana just showed us, if you're a program that gets the right coach in place, and Arkansas will have a different coaching staff, and you have resources like Arkansas does out of the SEC, you can execute a one-season turnaround. But on paper right now, that feels like a game Utah should win. And then you get an in-state game against Utah State. Bronco Mendenhall and his Aggies will be here in Salt Lake on September the 19th. Then you're at Iowa State, a road trip that typically would be a little bit tricky. I don't think it is this year, as we've already outlined. You get Kansas at home. Kansas made some changes, and they will have a new offensive coordinator from Penn State, but they're replacing a quarterback as well. You're at Colorado, okay? Who knows what Deion's team is going to look like. Then you get Houston, a top 25-ish team, but that's at home. And then you go on the road to Cincinnati. Brendan Sorsby has left Cincinnati, of course. He will be down at Texas Tech. I think Utah's either 7-0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8-0, excuse me. I think Utah is either 8-0 or 7-1 prior to the BYU game. Setting up on November 7th here in Salt Lake for a rivalry game that could be a virtual play-in to the Big 12 championship game. Because I'm just going to pencil Texas Tech in. They have proof of concept. They've reloaded in the transfer portal. And if you're Texas Tech, you avoid BYU and Utah, potentially your two biggest competitors to win the Big 12 championship. So December 4th, Arlington, Texas on a Friday night. Texas Tech is probably going to be on one side. And then on the other side, there's a good chance that that team will be whoever wins between Utah and BYU here in Salt Lake on November the 7th. Schedule release day. It's always fun during the offseason. We'll continue to break it down before we say goodnight at 6 on a busy Wednesday drive, and it's good to have you along for the ride right here on ESPN 700. So ESPN is doing what is called Rivalry Week in the NBA, which is an interesting thing. Were you aware that the Cavs and the Hornets are rivals? Did you know that prior to tonight?
Rivals Week, presented by AWS.
Shout out. Knicks, Nets, I guess the Borough rivalry. Pacers, Celtics, Hawks, Grizzlies, Pistons, Pelicans, Thunder, Bucks. Are these teams really rivals?
No.
Or is it just the ESPN broadcast?
Yeah, I mean, it's another installation, and to be honest with you, completely frank, ever since Adam Silver took over this thing, everything feels gimmicky. It feels like you're trying, right? Which I get, like you're trying something new. You're trying to get attention to basketball, but it's so obtuse that you just don't realize playing 80 games before you get into meaningful basketball is why you have so much meaningless basketball. You can throw a tournament on if you want. You can give the players some prize money in the middle of the season if you want. It's not going to make it meaningful basketball. And calling it Rivals Week while the teams that play each other 4 times a year at each arena, even though they're not rivals, is not going to do anything either.
Yeah, like you, I appreciate when a sport or a league tries new things. And you know, the issue with this conversation is the international footprint of the game of basketball brings revenue into the NBA where they won't even bat an eye about any pushback when it comes to, you know, fans domestically. And most everybody is still in football mode. We've got NFL playoffs going on. So when it comes to things like declining ratings in the United States or lack of interest from American sports fans, the NBA is in a different spot because outside of soccer, they're the biggest global game. And they have broadcast partners all over the world. There's a reason why Daryl Morey was summarily dismissed from the public eye after he sent out his tweet concerning China. People panicked, okay? And the hypocrisy steeped in the NBA being front-facing about social issues here domestically and completely turning a blind eye to the atrocities committed over in China is something that I've never run away from. But the dollar is the dollar. So speaking of soccer, all right. You ready for this?
Yeah.
We're going to do it. Let me be very clear. I worked for the Miller Sports and Entertainment Group for 7 years and had a great experience with them when I was with the Jazz. And I very much love and respect Gail Miller, and Steve Starks is not just a person who I worked for. I consider Steve a friend. And when it comes to their acquisition of Real Salt Lake and the Utah Royals, I think in large part it will end up being a good thing. I do. The push that, and we told our little buddy Trey that we'd mention this. So the Miller Sports and Entertainment Group sent out a survey today. And because I love my friends at Real Salt Lake and very much enjoyed my time there and am proud of what we built as a community pillar that a lot of people love, I will encourage you to go find the RSL social channels where you will find the link to the survey that the Millers are asking you to fill out. They're asking, among other things, that should they consider, and I want to get the questioning exactly correct. How would you describe your attitudes towards changing the name of Real Salt Lake? So they're asking the community for feedback on branding, and among the asks are whether or not you want them to change the name of RSL. Now, I'm under no illusion about the footprint of soccer. I know some of you, as soon as I start talking about soccer, your eyes either glaze over or you change the station. You don't give a rip. I was like you once. I had to grow to learn to love the sport, which I have. And a lot of that was because of bringing RSL here. I'm very excited for the World Cup in our region. I'm hoping to go to a match or two. So I know a lot of you don't care, but a lot of you do. So, Porter, before I launch into my diatribe to finish the show, what's your take on what was released earlier today?
Yeah, well, again, as you pointed out with the NBA thing, I like an effort. I like trying to get a feel for your market. So ultimately, like, do it. Send out the surveys, blah, blah, blah. But if you send out the surveys, you're going to get feedback. My feedback on a potential name change for RSL would be that would be asinine. Number one, focus on the product first, right? The on-field product. You are about to start a season, and the coach has been, I don't want to speak for him, just begging you to get him a roster because he's obviously shown you what he can do with one. Start with that ownership. The name change thing, for me, it makes no sense. This is a club that has, in 25 years of MLS existence, they've won a championship in this city. They've actually kind of built a little brand out. It's a good one. I think the Royals, RSL, I think it's a brand that is starting to really gain a foothold here, and people enjoy it and have a relationship with it. Changing that in a sport that is still trying to get a foothold in the footprint domestically would be a mistake. If you want to rebrand the Grizzlies or ECHL team in Reno, yeah, go ahead. But again, this is a team that's won a major cup, and I see no reason for it. So yeah, send out the surveys, do the thing, get the feedback. That's my feedback.
Well said. Look, it would be entirely misguided to change the name and the branding of Real Salt Lake. The brand equity exists over the course of now 21 years here, about to enter the 22nd year in this market. So I don't want to go overboard about how, being harsh, because I don't know how serious they are about potentially rebranding, or if they're just kicking the tires on the way that the community feels about it. But just for some context, before we say goodnight, as somebody who was in the rooms when we literally decided on the name and decided on the colors, I'm going to say red and blue. Trey will ask me to say claret and cobalt. And the reason is not that hard. We wanted BYU and Utah fans to be united about loving our soccer club. That was it. But the name Real Salt Lake was selected as a result of a partnership that we had with a little old soccer club called Real Madrid. We had a deal in place for them to come play, which they did. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It was one of my eye-opening moments to soccer to see David Beckham, Ruud van Nistelrooy. I could keep going. I mean, Iker Casillas. It was Los Galacticos, because it was a bunch of the biggest stars in the world, and there were people on their knees crying just to see the team that they've supported for their entire life. Now, the partnership also included a future that was supposed to be an academy in conjunction with Real Madrid, and the reasoning was simple. It was a way that we thought we could get really good players here. Now, as the story goes, the chairman of Real Madrid was let go, and then our relationship with them ended because we didn't know the new ownership and we didn't know the new people in charge. And then we sold the club later on to Deloy, who was the steward for a few years, and before moving on to Ryan Smith and David Blitzer, and now it has landed in the hands of the Millers. So I will echo Porter's sentiment. I don't know how much energy or stock is being put into this discussion, but you start your season in 32 days, and on paper, your roster is among the worst in all of Major League Soccer. Sign some players, give Pablo some help. If you want this thing to last and thrive in the community, invest in the on-field product, win soccer matches, go to the playoffs, and lift trophies, like we did in 2009 under the name of Real Salt Lake. All right. Rant over. We'll get out of here, Porter. What comes our way on a Thursday edition of the show?
Yeah, on a Thursday, Spence, of course, we'll go all over the map. Hey, maybe a little soccer too, but we'll touch all our bases. Kyle Bonagura of ESPN, Andy Larson stops by, Amy Donaldson stops by, a few more things in the works, but those three guests kind of touch all of our bases as far as local stuff goes.
There you go. So that'll be a fun Thursday program. Join us for that. We'll say goodnight. Special thank you today to Tony Jones, Quinn McLean, Tim McMahon, and Craig Bowlerjack. For the sound you missed from the show today, go to the website. It's ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. The ESPN 700 app is available in the App Store and the Google Play Store. And then finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon for 4 hours, check out our podcast page and support us over there because it actually helps us out. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. Subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments, and give us all the stars. It helps. For Porter, I'm Spence saying goodnight. Have a great Wednesday evening. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. We'll talk to you on a Thursday drive. As always, you can catch it right here on ESPN.